Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was a gold-ranked sage who saved the Sword Maiden, Naruto x Goblin Slayer girls. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unforeseen Sage. The transition was not gentle. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was locked in a cataclysmic struggle against a being that sought to unravel the very fabric of reality, his senses overwhelmed by the screech of tearing dimensions and the incandescent fury of clashing cosmic energies. The next, he was falling. The sensation was one of absolute dislocation, a violent expulsion from all that he knew. The roar of battle was replaced by an unnerving silence, the brilliant, chaotic hues of interdimensional chaos superseded by a profound, starless black. He did not panic. Panic was a luxury he had shed long ago, somewhere between a childhood of bitter loneliness and a young adulthood forged in the crucible of war. Instead, his mind, honed by countless battles and tempered by the wisdom of the Sage of Six Paths, immediately began to process, to analyze, to adapt. His eyes, glowing with the orange pigmentation of his perfect sage mode, snapped open, the cross-slit pupils contracting as they sought to pierce the oppressive darkness. There was no light, not a single photon to betray a shape or form. Yet, he could see. The world bloomed in his mind's eye not as a visual spectrum, but as a tapestry of life force. Of natural energy. He was submerged, adrift in an ocean of it, thicker and more primal than the energy of his own world. It was a raw, untamed power that pulsed with a life all its own. A stark contrast to the carefully balanced chakra he was accustomed to. He felt the ancient, slumbering consciousness of the planet beneath him, the quiet hum of countless trees, the slow, grinding life of stone and soil. His physical descent slowed, his body instinctively drawing in the ambient natural energy, a feat that would have turned any lesser sage to stone in an instant. He manipulated the wind, a subtle cushion of swirling air that cradled him, softening his impact as his sandals finally touched solid ground. He landed without a sound in the heart of a colossal forest. The air thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and decaying leaves. The trees were gargantuan, their trunks wider than houses, their canopy a dense, interlocking ceiling that blotted out what little moonlight might have penetrated the thick cloud cover. This place was old, ancient beyond reckoning, and it resonated with a power that was both exhilarating and profoundly alien. He closed his eyes, extending his sensory perception outward like a ripple in a pond. He felt the scurrying of small animals, the slow beat of a sleeping bear's heart miles away, the intricate network of roots that spread beneath his feet like a second nervous system for the forest itself. And then, he felt something else. A discordant note in the symphony of life. A cluster of flickering, panicked life forces, small and terrified, huddled together, and surrounding them, a tide of something utterly vile. It was a chaotic, malignant energy, a seething mass of hatred, cruelty, and base cunning that felt like sandpaper against his senses. Goblins. The name surfaced in his mind, a piece of residual knowledge from a scroll on mythical creatures Jiraiya had once made him read. He had dismissed it then as fantasy. He wasn't dismissing it now. The panicked life forces were human. He could feel their fear, a cold, sharp spike in the natural flow of energy. It was a fear so potent, so absolute, it felt like a physical scream in the silence of his mind. They were trapped, besieged, and they were losing. He could feel their life forces weakening, some flickering out with a final, desperate pulse. He had no context for this world, no understanding of its politics or its people. But he recognized suffering, he recognized the predatory glee of the strong preying on the weak. And Naruto Uzumaki, gold-ranked sage of Konoha, 7th Hokage, and child of prophecy, had made a career out of putting a stop to that. He turned his head, his gaze piercing through miles of dense forest as if it were glass. The direction was clear, a temple, he surmised, judging by the faint, residual aura of prayer and devotion that clung to the place like a fading perfume. A holy place, now desecrated. He took a single step, and the world blurred. He was no longer moving through the forest, he was a part of it. A golden streak of energy that flowed between the ancient trees, leaving behind only the whisper of a displaced breeze. The Sword Maiden was going to die. The thought was not born of despair, but of a cold, stark certainty that had settled deep within her bones. She stood on the precipice of the grand altar. The sacred texts of the Earth Mother clutched in one hand, her ceremonial blade, a relic of immense power but little practical use in this situation, held in the other. Her white and gold vestments were stained with soot and the blood of her priestesses. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, each one a testament to the terror that had been her constant companion for the last 3 days. It had started as a whisper, a rumor of a bolder than usual goblin tribe in the nearby foothills. The Adventurers Guild had been notified, a party of silver-ranked adventurers dispatched. They had never returned. Then came the first attack, a probing assault on the temple's outer walls. Her temple guards, brave and devout men, had repelled them, but not without losses. The second attack had come with the cover of a storm, a relentless, churning wave of green-skinned malice. They had breached the outer wall. Now, on the third day, the temple was overrun. The goblins were a tide of filth and depravity, their high-pitched, chittering laughter echoing through the hallowed halls, a sound that would haunt her nightmares for whatever remained of her life. They had defiled the sacred chambers, smashed priceless artifacts, and dragged away her priestesses, their screams a symphony of horror that had torn at her soul until it was raw and bleeding. She, along with the handful of surviving priestesses and the last 2 temple guards, had barricaded themselves in the main sanctuary. But the heavy oaken doors were splintering, the thick wood groaning under the repeated, rhythmic impact of a crude battering ram. With every shuddering boom, flakes of wood and dust rained down, and the shrieks of the goblins outside grew louder, more feverish. "Hold the line," shouted Sir Kale, his voice hoarse, his shield dented and splintered. He and Sir Jorek stood shoulder to shoulder, their bodies a final, desperate barrier before the doors. They were the last. The other 10 guards were gone, their bodies left where they fell. "They are too many, Your Eminence," Jorek gasped, a dark stain spreading across the surcoat on his shoulder. "We cannot hold them." Sword Maiden closed her eyes, her famous blindness a mercy in this moment. She did not need to see the splintering wood, the blood on the floor, or the terrified faces of the young acolytes huddled behind the altar. She could feel it all, a suffocating blanket of despair. She offered a silent, final prayer, not for salvation, but for a quick end, for the strength to not give the creatures the satisfaction of her screams. Crack, a section of the door blew inward, and a leering, green face with black, beady eyes peered through, its slobbering mouth splitting into a jagged grin. Jorek thrust his spear through the opening, and the goblin shrieked. But another immediately took its place. The sounds of their claws scrabbling at the wood were like rats in a wall, incessant, maddening. "It has been an honor to serve you, Sword Maiden," Kale said, his voice imbued with a somber finality. Before she could respond, the doors exploded. Not from the outside, but from a force that erupted from within the frame itself. A concussive blast of golden energy, silent and blindingly bright, vaporized the battering ram and sent the goblins at the forefront flying backward, their bodies incinerated to ash before they even hit the ground. The chittering horde outside fell silent, a sudden, shocking void of sound that was more terrifying than the noise it replaced. Into the newly created opening, a figure stepped. He was tall, clad in a strange, high-collared black and orange tunic that seemed utterly out of place in their world. His hair was the color of sun-bleached gold, a wild, spiky mane that framed a face of sharp, handsome features. But it was his eyes that held them all captive. They were the color of a sunset, a brilliant orange, with strange, horizontal pupils that seemed to glow with an inner light. A palpable aura of power radiated from him, a pressure that was immense but not malicious. It was like standing at the base of a mountain, a feeling of absolute, unshakable presence. He surveyed the scene, his gaze sweeping over the terrified priestesses, the wounded guards, and finally resting on Sword Maiden. His expression was calm, almost serene, yet his eyes held a depth of power and experience that made him seem ageless. He took in the barricade. The blood, the fear, and a flicker of something, sadness, perhaps, or anger, passed through his gaze. The goblins, recovering from their shock, let out a collective, furious howl and surged forward. A wave of rusted blades and jagged teeth. Sir Kale and Sir Jorek, despite their astonishment, raised their weapons, ready to sell their lives dearly. The newcomer didn't even turn. He simply raised a hand. His palm opened towards the tide of monsters. "Shinra Tensai," he said, his voice calm and clear, yet it resonated with a power that shook the very stones of the temple. An invisible, omnidirectional force erupted from his body. It was not a blast of wind or fire, but a wave of pure, irresistible force. The first few ranks of goblins were obliterated, their bodies turned to a red mist. The ones behind were flung backward with bone-shattering force, slamming into the walls of the corridor, into each other, their charge broken in a single, devastating instant. The corridor, moments before teeming with 100 goblins, was now a charnel house, littered with broken bodies and a spreading slick of black blood. Silence descended once more, absolute and profound. Naruto turned his head slightly, his glowing orange eyes meeting Sir Kale's wide, disbelieving gaze. "You can stand down," he said, his voice kind but firm. "I'll take it from here." He stepped past them, his movements fluid and economical, and walked out into the corridor, leaving the survivors in the sanctuary staring after him as if they had just witnessed the descent of a god. Sword Maiden felt a tremor run through her, a sensation she hadn't felt in a decade. It was not fear, it was hope, fragile and terrifying in its intensity. She took a hesitant step forward, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. Drawn by the incredible, calming energy that emanated from the stranger, Naruto stood in the center of the grand hallway, a space designed for peaceful processions, now a gallery of desecration. Tapestries were torn, statues of gods were beheaded, and the stench of goblin filth and stale blood was overpowering. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the natural energy of the world flood his senses, painting a perfect, three-dimensional map of the entire temple complex in his mind. He could feel them, hundreds of them, skulking in the dormitories, nesting in the library. They are foul energy, a stain on the sacred ground. He could feel their primitive, cruel thoughts, a chaotic mess of hunger, lust, and a glee for destruction. He pinpointed the largest concentrations, the NESTs, where they were holding their captives. He could feel the faint, terrified heartbeats of the captured priestesses, their life forces dimmed by terror and despair. His eyes snapped open, no longer just glowing, but burning with a cold, controlled fury. He raised his right hand, and a sphere of brilliant, swirling blue energy materialized in his palm, rotating with a high-pitched hum that sounded like 1,000 chirping birds. A Rasengan. He held it for a moment, then looked down the long, dark corridor to his right, where the largest group of goblins was hiding. He didn't need to be there. Sage art. Massive Rasengan barrage. He whispered. The Rasengan in his hand swelled to the size of a boulder, and then, it multiplied. Dozens of identical spheres of destructive energy appeared in the air around him, hovering like miniature blue suns, filling the hallway with their brilliant, humming light. With a simple, commanding thought, he sent them flying. They shot down the corridors, not as dumb projectiles, but as guided missiles of pure chakra. They navigated corners, split off to enter different rooms, and descended into the lower levels. The temple erupted in a series of muffled, concussive explosions. The stone walls shuddered, and dust rained from the ceiling, but none of the blasts breached the structure itself. Each Rasengan detonated with precise, controlled power, expanding just enough to eradicate every living thing within a specific chamber before dissipating. There was no screaming, only the sudden, final cessation of hundreds of vile life signatures. Back in the sanctuary, the survivors could only listen to the series of deep, resonant booms that echoed through the complex, each one shaking the foundations. It sounded as if a titan was striking the temple with a colossal hammer, again and again. Yet, the sounds were curiously contained, the destruction localized. Sword Maiden stood in the ruined doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, her senses, honed by her blindness, telling her a story her mind refused to believe. She could feel the vibrations through the soles of her feet, but more than that, she could feel the change in the atmosphere. The oppressive, cloying blanket of malice that had suffocated the temple for days was being erased. It was being systematically scoured away, chamber by chamber, corridor by corridor, by the overwhelming, cleansing energy of the golden-haired stranger. A few minutes later, which felt like an eternity, the explosion stopped. A profound silence fell over the temple, a quiet so deep and complete it felt unnatural. It was the silence of a tomb, but not of death. It was the silence of peace, the first true peace the temple had known in days. Naruto walked back into the sanctuary, his expression unchanged. There wasn't a speck of dust or a drop of blood on him. He seemed to exist apart from the filth and violence he had just unleashed. He stopped before the group, his gaze softening as he looked at the huddled, tear-streaked faces of the young priestesses. "It's over," he said simply. "They're all gone. You're safe now." Sir Kale, a veteran of 100 battles, a man who had faced down orc chieftains and rogue sorcerers, slowly, reverently, dropped to one knee. Jorik, wounded and weary, quickly followed suit. They were not bowing to a man, they were bowing to a miracle. The young priestesses, seeing the knight's example, began to kneel as well, their sobs of terror slowly turning into gasps of relief and awe. Sword Maiden remained standing, her body trembling. She couldn't kneel. Her legs wouldn't obey. She was the leader here, the spiritual guide for all these people, a figure of strength and grace. But in the face of this impossible salvation, she felt her composure, so carefully maintained for so long, begin to crack. What are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, betraying the tremor that ran through her. Naruto offered a small, disarming smile, a flash of RMTH that seemed to physically push back the chill of the violated sanctuary. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said. "And I guess you could say I'm just a traveler who got a little lost." He looked around at the devastation, the smile fading into a more determined line. "I've secured the main building, but their nest is likely in the catacombs beneath us. I can sense a much larger concentration of them down there, and some others. The ones they took." The mention of the captured priestesses sent a fresh wave of pain through Sword Maiden. She had assumed they were lost, their fates too horrible to contemplate. But this man, this Naruto, spoke of them as if their rescue was not a desperate hope, but a simple, logistical next step. "The catacombs," she breathed, her hand going to the holy symbol around her neck. "They are a labyrinth, a place of darkness where the dead are interred. The goblins have defiled it, made it their own. No adventurer has ever cleared it. They go in, but they don't come out. They haven't had me go in before," Naruto stated, not with arrogance, but with a simple, unshakable confidence that was more reassuring than any boast. He took a step closer, and for the first time, Sword Maiden got a clearer sense of him. He smelled of ozone, clean wind, and something else, something that reminded her of sunshine on an open field. It was a scent of life and vitality, a stark, profound contrast to the stench of death that permeated the temple. "Show me the entrance," he said. "I'll go down, eliminate their leader, and bring your people back." Sir Kale looked up, his face a mask of awe and concern. "Alone, my lord, it is a fortress down there. They say a goblin lord rules the deep tunnels." Naruto's eyes glinted. "A lord, good. It's always best to cut the head off the snake." He created a single shadow clone without a hand sign. The clone appeared in a silent puff of smoke, a perfect duplicate that shocked the onlookers into fresh silence. "My clone will stay here and guard you. It can alert me if there's any trouble." He then looked directly at Sword Maiden, and though she could not see him, she felt his gaze upon her as a tangible, comforting weight. "I promise you," he said, his voice imbued with the weight of absolute conviction, "no more of them will ever set foot in this sanctuary. This desecration ends now." Sword Maiden felt a tear trace a path through the grime on her cheek. For 10 long years, since the day the goblins had taken her sight and her innocence, she had lived in a world of muted terror, a constant, low-level fear that she had masked with piety and grace. She had prayed for salvation, for a hero to smite the darkness that had haunted her for so long. She had envisioned a knight in shining armor, a champion of the gods. She had never, in her wildest dreams, envisioned this. A golden-haired sage from another world, whose power was as gentle as it was terrifying, as compassionate as it was utterly absolute. She finally found the strength in her legs. With a grace born of years of ceremony, she sank into a deep, reverent curtsy, her head bowed. "The entrance to the catacombs is behind the grand altar," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "May the Earth Mother guide and protect you, Sir Naruto." Naruto reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch sending a jolt of warmth and pure, untainted life energy through her. "Don't worry," he said, his smile audible in his voice. She doesn't need to. I've got this. With that, he turned and walked towards the altar, his steps sure and silent. A golden warrior descending into the darkness to wage a one-man war. The clone he left behind stood sentinel at the doorway, its presence a silent, unbreachable wall between the survivors and the memory of their terror. For the first time in a decade, Sword Maiden felt the chilling grip of fear around her heart begin to loosen its hold. She had prayed for a hero, and the universe, in its infinite and unknowable wisdom, had answered. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Deep. The air changed the moment Naruto passed the threshold behind the grand altar. It grew heavy, compressed, as if the sheer weight of the earth above was squeezing the life out of it. The faint, holy scent of incense and old stone was instantly smothered by a foul miasma, a thick, gagging stench of unwashed bodies, stale blood, excrement, and a deeper, more ancient odor of rot and decay. Water dripped from the ceiling in a maddeningly irregular rhythm, each drop echoing in the profound darkness, sounding like footsteps in the oppressive silence. This was not the silence of peace he had created above. This was the silence of a predator's lair, the patient, waiting quiet of a place that consumed light and hope. To a normal man, the darkness would have been absolute, a disorienting void that would have reduced him to a fumbling, terrified child. For Naruto, it was simply a different kind of sight. Through his sage mode, the world was a vibrant, flowing river of energy, and this place was a festering, stagnant swamp. He could see the intricate web of tunnels and chambers spreading out beneath the temple like a diseased root system. He saw the cold, dormant energy of the long-dead humans interred in their stone sarcophagi, their final resting places now broken, their bones scattered and used for crude decorations. And woven through it all, he saw the chaotic, spiky signatures of the goblins, hundreds of them, their malice a constant, low-level thrum against his senses. He didn't take a single step without purpose. He stood at the entrance for a long moment, his eyes closed, his mind expanding to encompass the entirety of the labyrinth. He mapped every tunnel, every dead end, every hidden passage. He located the 5 distinct clusters of captives, their life forces fluttering like trapped moths in a jar, faint and terrified. He identified the larger, more potent signatures of what he assumed were hobgoblins, stationed as guards at key junctions. He noted the crude traps, pits lined with sharpened stakes, tripwires connected to falling rocks, seeing them not by their physical form, but by the subtle disturbances in the natural energy around them. And at the very heart of the nest, in the largest chamber, he felt a signature that was larger, fouler, and possessed of a dim, brutish cunning. The Goblin Lord. A plan formed in his mind, not in words, but in a fluid sequence of actions, a strategy of overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. This was not a battle to be fought, it was an infestation to be purged. These creatures, he mused, were a pure distillation of malice. There was no grand ambition like Madara's, no twisted philosophy of peace like Nagato's. There was only a primal urge to inflict pain, to defile, to destroy. They were less a people and more a plague, and Naruto felt a cold, righteous anger settle over him. He would not grant them the dignity of a protracted fight. He would be a force of nature, a cleansing fire. He moved. There was no sound, no warning. He flowed through the tunnels like water, his feet never seeming to touch the filth-strewn floor. He came upon the first goblin patrol, 4 of them, armed with crude, rusted swords and sharpened bones, arguing in their guttural, chittering tongue over a piece of stolen, moldy bread. Naruto didn't slow down. As he passed them, he extended a hand, and 4 miniature, almost invisible blades of wind shot from his fingertips. The goblins froze, their beady eyes wide with surprise, before their heads slid cleanly from their shoulders, their bodies slumping to the ground in a heap. He reached the first makeshift prison, a small burial crypt where the stone door had been replaced with a crude wooden gate. Inside, he could sense 6 priestesses, huddled together in the dark, and 4 goblin guards, their vile thoughts a palpable stain in the air. He didn't bother with the gate. Placing a single hand on the solid stone wall beside it, he whispered, "Sage art, earth release, stone mold jutsu." The rock softened like clay under his touch, and he simply phased through it, emerging inside the crypt as silently as a ghost. The goblins were so engrossed in tormenting their captives, poking them with the splintered ends of wooden spears, that they didn't notice him until he was already there. Before the first one could even turn its head, a Rasengan, silent and no larger than his fist, materialized and pressed against the back of its skull. The goblin's head simply ceased to exist, its bod wide dropping like a puppet with its strings cut. The other three turned, their jaws dropping in shock, and were met with the same fate, each dispatched with a single, brutally efficient application of the same technique. 3 silent flashes of blue light, and it was over. The priestesses, who had been cowering with their eyes shut, slowly looked up, expecting a new tormentor. What they saw was the same golden-haired savior from the sanctuary, standing amidst the still warm bodies of their captors, his expression one of profound sadness. His orange eyes, which should have been terrifying in the gloom, were instead beacons of warmth and safety. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the small chamber. "You're safe now." He knelt, and a gentle, green light enveloped his hands. He moved from one to the next, touching their shoulders, their arms, his medical ninjutsu flowing into them, sealing the cuts, mending the bruises, and easing the physical pain of their ordeal. The warmth of his chakra was more than just healing, it was purifying, washing away the lingering taint of the goblin's touch, chasing away the cold that had settled deep in their bones. One of the younger girls, barely a woman, began to sob uncontrollably, not from fear, but from a release of tension so profound it was physically painful. Naruto finished his work and then, with a single, signless thought, created 6 shadow clones. "They will take you back to the surface," he instructed the original, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Stay with them. Do not leave their side." The clones nodded, their faces mirroring his own gentle resolve. They moved with practiced care, helping the traumatized women to their feet, wrapping them in their own orange and black jackets for warmth and modesty, and guiding them out of the crypt and back through the now safe tunnels. He repeated this process 4 more times. Each encounter was a variation on the same theme of horror and salvation. He moved through the catacombs with the inexorable certainty of a rising tide, a silent, golden angel of vengeance. He dismantled traps by altering the flow of natural energy around them, causing pits to fill themselves in and tripwires to dissolve into dust. He encountered a goblin shaman, a wizened, stooped creature that hurled a ball of sickly green fire at him. Naruto simply held up a hand, and the natural energy that comprised the crude spell unraveled, the flames dissipating into harmless smoke a foot from his palm. The shaman's staff, topped with a human skull, clattered to the floor a moment after its owner's head. He found the remains of the silver-ranked adventurers. Their armor was broken, their weapons discarded, their bodies treated with the utmost desecration. He paused there for a moment, a flicker of respect for the fallen warriors passing through him. They had been brave, but they had been outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. They had fought against a tide of malice, and it had consumed them. Naruto made a silent promise to them that their deaths would be avenged, not just here, but in the memory of the people they died to protect. Finally, he stood before the entrance to the central chamber. It was a massive, ancient catacomb, once the final resting place of the temple's founders. Now, it was a throne room. The air was thick with the smoke of a foul-smelling fire pit, and the walls were smeared with crude, obscene paintings rendered in blood and filth. In the center of the room, upon a throne constructed of shattered sarcophagi lids, human bones, and stolen adventurer armor, sat the Goblin Lord. It was a monstrous thing, easily twice the size of a normal man, its muscles corded and thick under its mottled green-brown hide. A jagged scar ran across its face, and one of its eyes was a milky white orb. It wore a crude iron crown and clutched a massive, blood-stained cleaver in one hand. At its feet were its chosen guards, a dozen massive hobgoblins clad in piecemeal steel armor. And chained to the base of its throne was the final captive, a young priestess with hair the color of spun moonlight, her face pale with terror. The Goblin Lord's good eye fixed on Naruto as he stepped into the chamber. It let out a low, guttural laugh, a sound like grinding stones. "More food," it grunted in a broken, heavily accented version of the common tongue. "You are strong, brave, foolish. Let the girl go," Naruto said, his voice dangerously calm. He took another step into the room, his orange eyes seeming to suck all the light from the fire pit into them. "Leave this place and never return, and I might let you live." The Goblin Lord laughed again, a booming, arrogant sound. "This is my kingdom now. All things here are mine. The gold is mine. The food is mine. The women are mine. It gestured with its cleaver at the chained priestess. This one is special. She will be the mother of my new tribe. The hobgoblins jeered and rattled their weapons, their blood lust stoked by their leader's proclamations. The priestess whimpered, curling into a tighter ball. That was the final straw. The air in the chamber grew cold. The pressure that Naruto had been consciously suppressing was released. A wave of palpable power and killing intent that washed over the room. The hobgoblins' jeers died in their throats. The fire in the pit flickered and dimmed as if starved of air. The goblin lord's grin faltered, its brutish cunning finally recognizing that the being standing before it was not food. It was a predator of an entirely different order. You had your chance, Naruto said, his voice a low whisper that carried to every corner of the chamber. Before the goblin lord could even roar a command, Naruto was moving. He vanished from where he stood and reappeared in the midst of the hobgoblin guards. He didn't use a jutsu. This was pure taijutsu, the frog kata. His movements were a blur of orange and black, a dance of absolute lethality. He didn't just strike, he flowed. He used the subtle currents of natural energy in the room to augment his movements, to guide his limbs. An elbow to a throat, crushing a windpipe. The heel of a hand to a temple, shattering a skull. A sweeping kick that broke knees and sent armored bodies crashing into one another. It was over in less than 5 seconds. A dozen elite hobgoblin guards lay dead or dying, their armor useless. Their bodies broken by a force they couldn't even comprehend. The goblin lord stared, its one good eye wide with a mixture of fury and, for the first time, fear. It let out a bellow of rage and charged, raising its massive cleaver. The weapon, which could have split a knight in two, swung down with incredible force. Naruto didn't even bother to dodge. He simply raised one hand, catching the flat of the massive blade on his palm. The impact created a deafening clang that echoed through the cavern, but Naruto didn't move an inch. He stood there, holding the massive weapon in place with one hand. His expression utterly unimpressed. The goblin lord's eyes widened in disbelief. It pulled, trying to wrench its weapon free, but it was as if it were welded to the stranger's hand. My turn, Naruto said calmly. He tightened his grip, and the steel of the cleaver groaned and began to crumple in his hand like paper. With a flick of his wrist, he shattered the blade and sent the goblin lord stumbling backward. He took a single step forward and placed his hand on the creature's massive, barrel chest. Sage art. Rasenshuriken. He didn't need to create the massive, four-pronged version. A small, perfect sphere of swirling, blade-like chakra, no larger than a fist, formed on his palm. The sound it made was terrifying, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to slice the very air. The goblin lord howled, a sound of pure, instinctual terror, as the microscopic wind blades of the jutsu began to sever its life on a cellular level. It didn't explode, it simply dissolved. From its chest outward, its body disintegrated into a cloud of fine, gray dust, its howl cut short as its vocal cords ceased to exist. In a matter of seconds, all that was left of the mighty goblin lord was its iron crown, which clattered to the floor in the sudden, ringing silence. Naruto let out a slow breath, the cold fury receding, replaced by a weary calm. He turned to the chained priestess, who was staring at the pile of dust with wide, unblinking eyes. He walked over and gently broke the chains with a single touch. It's over, he said, his voice soft again. You're the last one, everyone else is safe. He created one more clone to carry the girl, who seemed too shocked to walk, and then turned his attention to the now empty throne room. This place was a cancer. It needed to be excised. He placed his hands on the floor, channeling his chakra deep into the stone. Earth release. Tectonic shift. The entire chamber groaned. The ground began to shake, and massive cracks appeared in the ceiling. He wasn't destroying the temple above, merely collapsing this single, massive chamber, burying the filth and the memory of what happened here under thousands of tons of rock. He turned and walked out of the chamber. The clone carrying the priestess following close behind, the sound of the collapsing cavern a final, thunderous punctuation mark on his cleansing of the catacombs. He emerged from the passage, behind the altar into the soft candlelight of the sanctuary. Sword Maiden and the others were there, huddled together, the rescued priestesses being tended to by their sisters. They all turned as he appeared. his silhouette framed by the dark passage from which he had emerged. He was unmarked, his clothes clean, looking as if he had just returned from a quiet stroll. The clone carrying the last priestess gently set her down, and she ran into the waiting arms of her friends before the clone dissipated in a puff of smoke. Naruto walked forward, stopping a few feet from Sword Maiden. "The nest is destroyed," he stated simply. "The leader is dead. Your people are safe. They will not trouble you again." The silence in the room was thick with unspoken emotion. Relief, gratitude, awe. Sword Maiden took a hesitant step forward, her hands clasped before her. She, who was the very picture of grace and composure, seemed at a loss for words. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid," she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. "You are our savior, Sir Naruto. A champion sent by the gods themselves." "I'm no champion," Naruto replied with a small, tired smile. "Just a guy who was in the right place at the right time." Quote. She took another step, her hand reaching out, hesitant. "May I?" she whispered. "I cannot see you with my eyes, but I wish to see the face of the man who answered my prayers." Naruto understood. He stood perfectly still, his heart going out to this woman who had endured so much. He knelt slightly to bring his face level with her outstretched hand. Her fingers, cool and delicate, gently traced the contours of his face. They moved over his brow, his cheekbones, the stubborn spikes of his hair. She felt the strange, whisker-like marks on his cheeks, a faint smile gracing her lips. Her touch was not just a physical act, it was a sensory exploration, a desperate attempt to comprehend the reality of the miracle before her. As her fingers brushed against his skin, she felt it, the overwhelming, pure, sun-bright energy that radiated from him. It was the antithesis of the cold, slimy darkness of the goblins. It was the feeling of life, of hope, of unwavering strength. And in that moment, a bond was forged, deeper than any mere gratitude. It was a connection born of shared trauma and impossible salvation, a quiet understanding that passed between the Age and the Maiden in the silence of the reclaimed sanctuary. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A Saint's Gratitude, a King's Summons. The dawn that broke over the temple was the first in 3 days not shrouded in a pall of smoke and fear. It was a clean, crisp morning, the sunlight spilling over the eastern mountains and washing the stone walls in hues of gold and rose. It was a dawn of impossible survival, and it found Naruto Uzumaki not resting, but working. He stood in the center of the main courtyard, a space that had been a battlefield littered with debris and the foul bodies of goblins just hours before. Now, it was almost pristine. He was not alone. Spread throughout the temple complex were over 200 identical versions of himself, a silent, impossibly efficient army of shadow clones. Some were meticulously repairing the splintered oaken doors, their hands glowing with a faint green chakra as they coaxed the wood to mend and knit itself back together. Others were scrubbing the floors and walls of the hallowed halls, using precise applications of water and wind-style jutsu to scour away the bloodstains and filth, leaving the stone gleaming and sanctified once more. A dedicated team was in the library, painstakingly piecing together torn scrolls and reshelving scattered tomes, their movements delicate and precise. Another group was outside, digging a deep, respectful grave for the fallen temple guards and adventurers, while a separate, more clinical team disposed of the goblin corpses with a high-intensity fire jutsu that left behind nothing but sterile ash. Sword Maid. En stood on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, a simple woolen blanket draped over her shoulders. The rescued priestesses had brought her here, and she had stood in silence for nearly an hour, listening. The sounds were what struck her the most. There was no shouting, no barked orders, no chaos. There was only the rhythmic swish of brooms, the quiet scrape of trowels on stone, the gentle hum of some unseen energy, and the rustle of hundreds of identical orange and black uniforms moving in perfect, unnerving synchronicity. It was the sound of a miracle being methodically organized into reality. Sir Kale approached, his footsteps slow and heavy. His wounds had been healed by Naruto's inexplicable art, but the exhaustion ran bone deep. He stopped beside her, his gaze also fixed on the scene below. "In all my years," he said, his voice raspy with awe, "in all the tales of the gods and the great heroes of the Platinum Age, I have never heard of a power like this. To not only possess the might to slay an army, but the ability to to multiply that might for such mundane tasks. It is beyond comprehension. He is not a hero from our tales, Kale, Sword Maiden replied softly, her voice regaining its melodic calm. He is something else entirely. Something new. She had felt the surge of chakra when he had created the clones, a momentary, staggering wave of energy that had washed over the temple. To wield such power not for destruction, but for cleaning and repair, it spoke more to his character than the annihilation of the goblin horde. It spoke of a profound kindness, a desire not just to save, but to heal. To restore what was broken. When the sun was fully risen, the original Naruto looked up, his senses telling him she was there. He gave a small, friendly wave and then vanished in a flicker of movement, reappearing on the balcony beside her as silently as the morning mist. The suddenness of his arrival still made Kale flinch, but Sword Maiden merely turned her head towards the source of his warmth. "Your helpers are very efficient," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time since the ordeal began. "Shadow clone jutsu," Naruto explained simply. "They're all me, just with a fraction of my power. Good for overwhelming an enemy, and even better for finishing chores before lunchtime." He looked out at the rising sun, his expression thoughtful. "It's a beautiful place you have here. Peaceful. It reminds me a little of home." The mention of his home brought a question to the forefront of her mind, one that had been swirling there since he had first appeared. "Sir Naruto," she began, her tone formal yet inquisitive, "you said you were a traveler. Your accent is unfamiliar, your clothing is like nothing I have ever seen, and your abili ties, they are not the magic of our mages, nor the holy power of our priests. From what land do you hail?" Naruto leaned against the stone balustrade, the morning sun catching in his golden hair. He was silent for a long moment, not out of hesitation, but as if trying to find the right words to explain the impossible. "The truth is," he said finally, his voice low, "I'm not sure you'd find my home on any map in this world. I was fighting someone, something. There was a tear in the fabric of things, a portal. I was pushed through. When I woke up, I was falling into the forest near here." He kept the details vague, Kagaya. The dimensions, the war, knowing they would be meaningless concepts here. "Where I'm from, we use an internal energy we call chakra, to perform feats you might call magic. We call it jutsu." Sword Maiden processed this, her mind, trained in theology and philosophy, more open to such incredible ideas than a common soldier's might be. A man from another world. An otherworlder. It was the stuff of the most fanciful legends, yet he stood beside her, the scent of sunshine and ozone a solid, undeniable reality. It explained everything, and nothing. "Then you are truly alone here," she whispered, a profound wave of empathy washing over her. To be so powerful, yet so utterly displaced. To save others while being, himself, completely lost. Naruto shrugged, though the gesture felt a little heavier than usual. "For now. But I've been alone before. The important thing is, I'm here now, and I can help. Which brings me to my next question." He turned to face her more directly. "I need to understand this world. Its rules, its dangers, its people. Can you tell me, what was that thing I killed in the catacombs? Why were they attacking this place?" And so, she began to explain. With the quiet diligence of a scholar and the patient grace of a high priestess, Sword Maiden became his tutor. They sat in the newly cleaned library, a single ray of sunlight illuminating the dust motes dancing between them. She told him of the four-cornered world, so named for the four great kingdoms that held sway. She spoke of the gods, of the Earth Mother whom she served, of the Supreme God, the God of wisdom, and others. She explained the fragile peace that existed between the races of man, elves, and dwarves, a peace constantly threatened by the races of chaos, the demon lords and their monstrous armies. And she told him of the goblins. She explained that they were considered the weakest and most pathetic of monsters, a nuisance that the great armies and heroes couldn't be bothered with. Their threat was left to fledgling adventurers, a first bloodying for those who sought glory. But their weakness was a deception. Their strength lay in their numbers, their cunning, their cruelty, and their horrifying ability to multiply. She explained, her voice losing its composure for a moment, how they targeted farms and villages, and how they took women, for sport, and for propagation. For the first time, Naruto understood the true, sickening depth of their depravity. His cleansing of the nest no longer felt like a battle, it felt like a necessary extermination. She explained the Adventurers Guild, a necessary institution created to handle the constant, low-level threats the armies ignored. She detailed the ranking system, a ladder of color-coded metal tags from porcelain to steel, then silver to gold. And the near-mythical platinum rank, reserved for heroes of legend who had faced down demon lords. "You," she said, her head tilted as if she were studying a complex theological text. "The power you demonstrated, annihilating an entire horde, slaying a goblin lord as if he were a troublesome insect, that is the stuff of gold rankers, or perhaps even beyond. Yet you have no rank, no reputation. You are an absolute anomaly, Sir Naruto." Naruto just listened, absorbing it all, his mind a sponge for information. A world under constant siege, with a formalized system for monster slaying. It was so different from his own, where the threats were primarily other ninja, other humans. Here, the enemy was a constant, inhuman force of nature. "In my world," Sword Maiden continued, her hands clasped in her lap, "a great deed demands a great reward. The temple, and I as its archbishop, owe you a life debt. I can offer you gold, more than you could carry. I can grant you a place of honor within the church, a life of comfort and safety. Anything you desire that is within my power to grant, you have but to name it." Naruto considered her offer. He looked around the library, at the peaceful sunlight, at this woman whose life he had saved. He could stay here, he could be safe, but that wasn't him. He had never been one to sit still. "Thank you," he said genuinely. "But I don't need gold or a title." He gave her one of his signature foxy grins, a flash of the boy he used to be. "Right now, I'd settle for a good map of the kingdom, some of your local currency so I can buy food. And maybe a hot bowl of ramen, if you have any." Sword Maiden looked baffled for a moment, before a soft, melodic laugh escaped her lips. It was a beautiful sound, like wind chimes in a summer breeze. And it held a decade of unshed relief. "Ramen?" she asked. "I am not familiar with that dish, but I will have my chefs prepare you the finest meal in their repertoire. And a pea and a pouch of gold are the simplest of requests." She stood, her grace and composure fully returned. "You are a strange man, Naruto Uzumaki. A very good, very strange man." Their conversation was interrupted by the urgent arrival of a young priestess. "Your Eminence," she said, bowing deeply, "a rider approaches. He bears the crest of the king." Moments later, they were in the newly repaired courtyard to greet the arrival. The man was a royal courier, his leather armor caked with dust, his horse lathered in sweat. He dismounted, his eyes wide as he took in the pristine state of the temple. He had clearly been expecting to ride into a scene of carnage. He bowed stiffly before Sword Maiden. "Archbishop," he said, his voice strained with confusion. "I bring a summons from His Majesty, King Alaric. We received word that the temple was under siege by a goblin army of unprecedented size. The king has dispatched a company of knights, but they are still a day's ride away. He commands your presence at the capital to give a full report on the situation." The courier looked around again, at the calm priestesses and the mended walls. "But, it appears the reports were exaggerated." "The reports were accurate," Sword Maiden stated, her voice clear and strong. "The temple was besieged. The goblin horde numbered in the thousands. They were led by a goblin lord." The courier's jaw dropped. "Thousands. A lord. But that's impossible. A force of that size could have laid siege to a fortress. How did you repel them? Where is the army?" Sword Maiden turned and gestured gracefully to Naruto, who was standing nearby, watching the exchange with a curious expression. "We needed no army," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that was absolute. "We had him." The courier's eyes fell upon Naruto. He took in the strange clothes, the sun-bright hair, and the calm, powerful demeanor. He saw a man, not an army. His face settled into an expression of profound disbelief and skepticism. This man fought off a goblin army. Alone. "I had some help," Naruto said, jerking a thumb at himself. "A few hundred of my closest friends." The courier's expression soured, thinking he was being mocked. Before he could make a retort, Sword Maiden spoke again. "This is Sir Naruto Uzumaki, our savior. The king's summons is for me, but it is he who should be giving the report. He is the one who ended the threat. The courier was in a difficult position. His orders were for the archbishop. But the story he was being told, as incredible as it was supported by the impossible evidence before his eyes. He made a decision. His Majesty will want to hear of this. I will amend the summons. The king will wish to meet the man who can single-handedly accomplish what would have taken a company of his finest knights. He bowed again, this time including Naruto in the gesture. Please, prepare for the journey. The capital must be informed. 2 days later, they were on the road. The journey was a stark contrast to the claustrophobic horror of the temple siege. They traveled in a simple but comfortable carriage provided by the temple, with Sir Kale and Sir Jorik, who had insisted on accompanying them, riding as guards. Naruto, however, preferred to walk, his long, easy strides effortlessly keeping pace with the horses. He found the open air refreshing, the vast, rolling green hills and dense forests of this new world a source of constant fascination. He could feel the vibrant life energy of the land, so different from the elemental nations, and it soothed the part of him that as still reeling from his dimensional displacement. He and Sword Maiden spoke for hours. She would describe the landmarks they passed, telling him the history of a ruined castle on a hill or the local superstitions about a particular dark wood. In turn, he told her carefully edited stories of his home, of his village hidden in the leaves, of his friends, of his dream to become a leader who could protect everyone. He spoke of teamwork, of the will of fire, of never giving up. To her, these were not just stories, they were parables, insights into the formation of the incredible man walking beside her. A bond, forged in desperation, was now being tempered in shared experience and quiet conversation. She found herself listening for the sound of his footsteps, for the warm, confident timbre of his voice. He was a beacon of safety in a world that had offered her none for a very long time. On the evening of the third day, as they were making camp, Naruto held up a hand, stopping the carriage. "We've got company," he said quietly. Kale and Jorik immediately drew their swords, their eyes scanning the darkening woods around them. "Goblins, orcs?" Kale asked, his voice tense. "Neither," Naruto replied, his eyes focused on a dense thicket 50 yards away. "Just a few hungry men with bad intentions." He raised his voice, not shouting, but projecting it with a cushion of chakra so it carried perfectly. "You can come out now. Leave your weapons on the ground, and I'll pretend I didn't sense you." There was a moment of silence, then a rustling in the bushes. 6 grimy men in patched leather armor emerged, holding rusted swords and axes. They were clearly bandits, their eyes holding a mixture of surprise and menace. Their leader, a big man with a ragged beard, sneered. "Census, did ya? Clever one, ain't ya?" he growled. "Don't matter. Just leave the carriage, the woman, and all our valuables, and we might let you boys live." Kale and Jorik took up defensive positions in front of the carriage, ready to fight. Sword Maiden remained inside, her hands clasped in prayer, but for the first time in such a situation, she felt no fear. Naruto was here. Naruto sighed, a sound of mild annoyance. "I really don't have time for this." He didn't move. He simply flared his chakra, just a tiny fraction of his full power, and infused it with the same palpable killing intent he had used against the Goblin Lord. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated pressure, the psychic manifestation of a being who had fought in a world war and stared down gods. The air grew thick and heavy. The bandits' bravado evaporated instantly. Their knees buckled. Their weapons clattered to the ground from nerveless fingers. They began to sweat, their eyes wide with a primal terror they had never known. They weren't looking at a man anymore. They were looking at a natural disaster, a predator at the absolute apex of the food chain. "I believe he asked you to leave," Naruto said, his voice still perfectly calm. The bandits didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled to their feet, falling over each other in their haste to flee, and vanished into the woods, their panicked whimpers fading into the distance. Kale and Jorik slowly lowered their swords, staring at Naruto with a fresh level of awe. He had defeated them without moving a muscle, without throwing a single punch. Naruto just shrugged. Saves time. The rest of the journey was uneventful. As they crested the final hill, the capital city of an entire kingdom came into view, sprawling across a wide valley. It was a magnificent sight. A sea of red-tiled roofs and white stone walls, dominated by the spires of the royal palace, which gleamed like a jewel in the afternoon sun. As they approached the main gate, they were met by a contingent of riders. They were royal knights, their steel-plate armor polished to a mirror shine, their horses clad in barding bearing the royal crest of a golden lion. At their head was a woman who rode her white charger with an easy, practiced grace. Her armor was of the same make as the others, but it was finer, with subtle silver filigree on the pauldrons and gorget. She wore no helmet, revealing a severe but beautiful face, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and piercing, intelligent gray eyes. Her hair was the color of platinum, braided into a tight, intricate coronet that bespoke discipline and nobility. She radiated an aura of calm, unshakable authority. She brought her horse to a halt before the carriage and dismounted in a single, fluid motion. Her gaze swept over the scene, assessing Kale and Jorik, the carriage, and finally, Naruto. Her gray eyes lingered on him, taking in his strange attire and the relaxed, confident way he stood. There was no deference in his posture, no awe at the sight of the royal knights. He simply met her gaze with a curious, friendly one of his own. Archbishop Sword Maiden, the knight said, her voice a clear, commanding alto. She gave a crisp, formal bow. I am Captain Serafina of the Royal Guard. His Majesty sent me to escort you safely into the city. He is most anxious to hear your report. Her eyes flickered back to Naruto. And to meet your companion. Quote, the word, companion, was delivered with a tone of professional neutrality, but Naruto could detect the undercurrent of skepticism, of assessment. This was a woman who believed in order, in training, in the clear hierarchies of the military and the guild. A story about a mysterious stranger appearing from nowhere and single-handedly wiping out an army would go against every tenet of her ordered world. Captain Serafina, Sword Maiden's voice replied from within the carriage. Your presence is most welcome. This is Sir Naruto Uzumaki, to whom we all owe our lives. Serafina gave Naruto a curt, professional nod. Sir Naruto, the tales of your deeds precede you. You will forgive me if I find them difficult to credit. That's fair, Naruto said with an easygoing smile. I find most of my life difficult to credit. His disarming response seemed to catch the stoic captain off guard for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, surprise, interest, passed through her gray eyes before her professional mask was back in place. Indeed, she said, if you will follow us, the palace awaits. With that, she remounted her horse, her movements economical and precise. The royal knights formed a protective cordon around the carriage, and the procession began its final approach to the capital. Naruto fell into step beside Serafina's horse, matching its pace with his own effortless stride. They rode in silence for a time, the massive walls of the city looming ever closer. He could feel her gaze on him, analytical, questioning. She was a puzzle, he decided. A woman encased in armor both physical and metaphorical. It was a challenge he found interesting. They passed through the massive city gates, and the noise and smell of a metropolis washed over them. The streets were thronged with people, a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of merchants, artisans, nobles, and beggars. The air was thick with the scent of baked bread, horse manure, forge smoke, and 1,000 other scents of life. It was overwhelming and full of energy. And as he looked up at the towering spires of the royal palace, Naruto had a feeling that his life in this new world was about to get a lot more complicated. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Sage, the Sword, and the Throne. The royal palace was not a building, it was a statement. Carved from pristine white marble that seemed to drink the sunlight. It rose above the sprawling capital not with the brutish dominance of a fortress, but with the elegant, unshakable confidence of a divine mandate. As Naruto and the processio passed through the final gilded gates into the inner courtyard, the chaotic sounds of the city fell away, replaced by the hushed, reverent atmosphere of absolute power. Fountains sculpted in the likeness of ancient heroes whispered crystalline plumes of water into the air. Manicured gardens, bursting with flowers of impossible color and vibrancy, scented the air with a perfume of controlled, cultivated nature. Guards in ceremonial armor, polished to an impossible sheen, stood as still as statues, their eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point of duty. Naruto's senses, however, told him a different story. Beneath the veneer of peace and order, the palace was a hive of energy. He could feel the thrum of countless lives within its walls, servants rushing through hidden corridors, nobles engaged in hushed conspiratorial conversations in private chambers, the low, steady hum of the royal guard's collective vigilance. He felt the weight of history in the ancient stones, the residual psychic energy of generations of rulers, of triumphs and tragedies, of secrets and decrees that had shaped the lives of millions. It was, in its own way, as much of a labyrinth as the goblin-infested catacombs. Just with more velvet and less filth, Captain Serafina led them through a series of cavernous, echoing halls. Their footsteps were the only sound on the polished marble floors, a rhythmic counterpoint to the silent judgment of the portraits of stern-faced kings and queens that lined the walls. She did not speak, her posture rigid, her focus entirely on her duty. Naruto, however, felt the constant, subtle glances she sent his way, her professional curiosity warring with her ingrained skepticism. He met her gaze once with a friendly wink, an act of such casual irreverence in this hallowed place that she almost faltered in her step, a faint flush rising on her sharp cheekbones before being ruthlessly suppressed. They were not led directly to the throne room, but to a richly appointed antechamber. The walls were hung with intricate tapestries depicting the founding of the kingdom, and the furniture was carved from a dark, lustrous wood. It was a place of comfortable, opulent waiting, a subtle reminder that the king's time was his own. His Majesty will see you shortly, Serafina announced, her tone as starched as her uniform. Please, make yourselves comfortable. She gave a bow and stationed herself outside the heavy oak doors, a silent, beautiful guardian. Sword Maiden sat on the edge of a velvet settee, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Despite her high station, the sheer weight of the royal palace was intimidating. I have not been summoned to the palace in 3 years, she said quietly, her voice a near whisper. The king is a just man, but he does not suffer fools. Nor does he appreciate complications. And I'm the biggest complication to walk into his kingdom in a long time, Naruto finished for her, a grin touching his lips. He ignored the chairs, opting instead to wander the room, examining a tapestry that showed a knight in platinum armor driving a spear through the heart of a great, winged demon. Don't worry, I'll be on my best behavior. His complete lack of anxiety was, to her, both baffling and profoundly reassuring. He moved with an easy confidence, an utter lack of intimidation that seemed to warp the very atmosphere of the room around him. This was not the arrogance of a nobleman born to power, but the deep, unshakable calm of a man who had faced the end of the world and had not flinched. He was the mountain, and this palace, for all its grandeur, was just a building sitting on its slopes. An hour passed. It was another calculated move, a test of patience. Finally, the doors opened, and a different official, a man in the silken robes of a royal chamberlain, bowed low. His Majesty, King Alaric III, will grant you an audience. The throne room was designed to inspire awe and diminish all who entered. The ceiling soared 100 feet into the air, a vaulted expanse of painted frescoes and gilded beams. Sunlight, filtered through massive stained glass windows depicting saints and warriors, fell in long, colorful shafts across the floor, illuminating the floating dust motes like constellations in a private galaxy. A long, crimson carpet stretched like a river of blood from the entrance to the dais at the far end of the room, upon which sat the golden throne of Theron. And on the throne, sat the king. He was not the frail, wizened monarch Naruto might have expected. King Alaric was a man in his late 50s. His hair and neatly trimmed beard more salt than pepper. He was broad-shouldered, and though he wore the rich ermine-trimmed robes of his station, he had the bearing of a soldier. His face was a roadmap of a life spent bearing heavy burdens, lined with care and command. But it was his eyes that held Naruto's attention. They were a deep, intelligent blue, and they held the weary, calculating gaze of a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. Flanking the throne were members of his royal council, aging men with shrewd, assessing eyes and the soft hands of politicians and scribes. Standing near the dais, a silent sentinel, was Captain Serafina, her duty as personal guard to the king superseding her role as escort. And to the right of the throne, on a slightly smaller, more elegant chair, sat a young woman who immediately drew Naruto's eye. She was, by any standard, breathtakingly beautiful. Her hair was a cascade of rich auburn, intricately styled with pearls and golden thread. Her gown was a masterpiece of deep emerald silk that complemented her fair skin and hinted at a graceful, slender figure. But her beauty was secondary to the fierce intelligence that burned in her emerald green eyes. While the council members were looking at the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, she was studying Naruto. Her gaze was sharp, analytical, missing nothing. This was a woman who was not merely present. She was observing, calculating, playing the game of court with a skill that likely belied her years. This, Naruto surmised, must be the princess. As they reached the foot of the dais, Sword Maiden knelt in a deep, fluid genuflection. Kale and Jorik did the same. Naruto, unfamiliar with the custom and unwilling to bow to a power he did not yet know or respect, simply gave a slight, polite incline of his head. The gesture, or lack thereof, sent a ripple of murmurs through the council. Archbishop Sword Maiden, the king's voice boomed, deep and resonant. You have been sorely missed. Rise. The reports we received were alarming. A goblin army, thousands strong, led by a lord, laying siege to the Grand Temple. An unprecedented threat. Tell us what transpired. Sword Maiden rose, her sightless eyes fixed in the direction of the king's voice. She recounted the events of the siege, her voice starting as a fragile whisper as she described the terror and the despair, then growing in strength and fervor as she spoke of the arrival of her savior. She described the flash of golden light, the wave of force that had shattered the goblin charge, the systematic, almost divine eradication of the horde. Her words painted a picture not of a man, but of a vengeful god, a golden-haired angel of salvation sent by the heavens in their darkest hour. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the throne room. The council members looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and outright scorn. A portly man in lavish purple robes, whom Naruto pegged as someone important and self-satisfied, scoffed audibly. Your Majesty, the man said, his voice dripping with condescension, the Archbishop has clearly suffered a great trauma. Her mind, understandably, has colored the events. A single man cannot achieve such things. Perhaps a clever adventurer with a few powerful magical artifacts. The Archbishop does not lie. Minister Baratheon, Sir. Athena's crisp voice cut through the air. She took a step forward. I have seen the aftermath. The temple is pristine. The bodies of the enemy were comprehensively disposed of. There is no sign of a battle because it was not a battle. It was an execution. And I have spoken with Sir Kale, a man of unimpeachable honor. His account corroborates the Archbishop's. The Minister of War, a grizzled man with a face like a bulldog, grunted. Honor is one thing, Captain. The laws of reality are another. A goblin lord alone is a match for a dozen silver-ranked adventurers. King Alaric raised a hand, and the council fell silent. His weary blue eyes finally settled on Naruto, who had stood through the entire exchange with a look of patient, detached interest. So, the king said, his voice a low rumble. You are the miracle worker. Naruto Uzumaki. He pronounced the name carefully, as if tasting something foreign. The Archbishop claims you are a gift from the gods. Minister Baratheon believes you are a charlatan. The Minister of War believes you are an impossibility. Tell me, Sir Naruto, what are you? It was the ultimate question, laden with a dozen others. Who are you? What do you want? Are you a threat? Naruto met the king's gaze without flinching. I'm a traveler who got lost, he said, his voice calm and clear, easily filling the vast chamber. I saw people who needed help, so I helped them. That's all. A simple answer to a complex question, the king noted, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. This help you rendered, what is the nature of this power? Are you a mage, a warlock who consorts with spirits? Quote, neither, Naruto replied. Where I'm from, we call it chakra. It's the energy that flows through all living things. I just have a knack for using it. The princess leaned forward slightly, her chin resting on her steepled fingers, her emerald eyes alight with intense curiosity. Chakra, a new word, a new concept. And where, precisely, are you from? Minister Baratheon interjected, his tone accusatory. No kingdom on this continent has ever heard of such an art. Probably because my home isn't on this continent, Naruto said easily. Or even in this world, from what I can gather. Another wave of murmurs, this time louder, more shocked. The king's eyes narrowed. An otherworlder. The stuff of children's tales. The tale at the Grand Temple was very real, Sword Maiden said firmly. Proof. Minister Baratheon demanded, his face flushed. This is all hearsay and madness. If this man has such power, let him show us. Let him give us a demonstration. Or we should cast him out as a deceiver who preys on the traumatized. All eyes turned to Naruto. The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down on the crimson carpet. They expected a ball of fire, a bolt of lightning. Some grand, theatrical display. Naruto simply smiled. All right. He didn't move. He didn't make a hand sign. He didn't even blink. Beside him, in a silent, instantaneous manifestation, a second Naruto Uzumaki appeared. It was not a shimmer, not a ghost, but a solid, perfect duplicate. It looked around the room, gave the stunned minister a cheeky grin, and then folded its arms, mirroring the original's relaxed stance. There was no puff of smoke, no surge of magic that the court mages could detect. One moment there was one of him, the next there were two. The room fell into a silence so profound it was almost deafening. Minister Baratheon's jaw hung open, his face pale. The Minister of War's bulldog-like features were frozen in a mask of stunned disbelief. Serafina's usually stoic expression was broken by a visible widening of her gray eyes, her mind racing to comprehend the tactical implications of such an ability. The princess, however, did not look shocked. She looked fascinated, a brilliant, predatory gleam in her eyes, as if a new, unbelievably powerful piece had just appeared on the grand chessboard of the kingdom. King Alaric stared at the two Narutos for a long, silent moment. He had seen the greatest mages of the realm, men who could call down firestorms and raise walls of stone. All of them required incantations, gestures, artifacts, a visible and understandable effort. This was something else. This was quiet, effortless, and utterly absolute. This was the power to create a soldier, an army, from nothing. The reports were not exaggerated. If anything, they were understatements. I see, the king said, his voice heavy. The clone, sensing it had made its point, vanished as silently as it had appeared. The kingdom owes you a great debt, Sir Naruto. A debt we intend to repay. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from that of a judge to that of a statesman. I would offer you a place in my kingdom. A title, IWILL name you Baron of the Western Marches, a region long troubled by monsters. I will grant you land, a keep, and the resources to raise a force to protect it. Serve the crown, Sir Naruto. Lend your NSI talents, to the security of this realm. Become one of us. It was a magnificent offer. A title, land, power. A path to becoming one of the most influential men in the kingdom. It was also, Naruto instantly understood, a golden cage, a way to bind him, to place him within the kingdom's hierarchy where he could be monitored, controlled, and directed. A way to turn an unpredictable force of nature into a tool of the state. Naruto smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to momentarily surprise the weary king. That is a generous offer, Your Majesty. Truly. But I have to respectfully decline. The council gasped. To refuse a gift from the king was a grave insult. Decline? The king asked, his voice dangerously low. You would refuse a barony. I'm not a lord, and I don't want to be, Naruto said simply. His tone respectful but firm. I don't need a keep or a title to help people. In fact, it sounds like a lot of paperwork. A few of the younger knights by the wall stifled a laugh. The Archbishop told me about the Adventurers Guild. A system where people can post requests, and adventurers can take them on, protecting the people the armies can't always reach. It sounds like a good system. He looked directly at the king, his orange eyes holding no deceit, only honest intention. I don't want to be a nobleman. I want to be an adventurer. I'll start at the bottom, take quests, and work my way up. That way, I can be where I'm needed most, helping the everyday people on the frontiers who are being terrorized by things like goblins. And I'll be doing it as a free man, not as a political asset. His response was a masterstroke, though he didn't even think of it in those terms. He had sidestepped the golden cage, affirmed his desire to protect the kingdom, and declared his independence all in one breath. He had refused the king's authority while simultaneously aligning himself with the king's goals of protecting his subjects. He had outmaneuvered the entire cour. She without an ounce of malice or political cunning, but with simple, straightforward honesty. The king leaned back in his throne, studying Naruto with a new level of respect. This was not some simple-minded warrior with a mysterious power. This was a man with an unshakable sense of self, a clear moral compass, and a will that would not be easily bent. For the first time in a long time, the king was genuinely intrigued. An adventurer, he mused. You would trade a barony for a life of sleeping in cheap inns and fighting monsters for a handful of coins. The reward isn't the point, Naruto said. The helping is. A slow smile spread across King Alaric's face. Very well, Sir Naruto. An adventurer you shall be. The guild is an independent body, but a word from the crown will smooth your entry. We will provide you with a letter of recommendation and a starting stipend, in gratitude for your service to the temple. He looked at Sword Maiden. The crown also thanks you, Archbishop, for bringing this remarkable man to our attention. He then looked to his daughter. The Princess Annalise was gazing at Naruto, her earlier analytical expression now tinged with something else. Admiration, speculation. She caught his eye and gave him a slow, deliberate, and utterly enchanting smile. It was a smile that promised intrigue, a smile that acknowledged she had just witnessed something extraordinary and wanted to know more. The audience was over. As they were escorted from the throne room, Naruto felt three distinct pairs of eyes on his back. The grateful, devoted gaze of Sword Maiden. The sharp, reassessing, and undeniably intrigued gaze of Captain Serafina. And the intelligent, calculating, and newly interested gaze of Princess Annalise. He had walked into the lion's den and had emerged not only unscathed, but on his own terms. His life as an adventurer in this strange new world was about to begin. And it was already shaping up to be far more interesting than just fighting goblins. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Porcelain, Steel, and the Whispers of the Guild. The exit from the royal palace was the inverse of their arrival. The oppressive weight of scrutiny and judgment lifted with every step they took away from the gleaming white marble and back toward the vibrant, chaotic heart of the city. The air grew thicker, warmer, filled with the smells of life rather than the sterile scent of power. For Sword Maiden, it was like surfacing from a deep, cold ocean, the pressure in her ears finally equalizing. For Naruto, it was simply a change of scenery. They walked in silence for a time, their carriage and escort following at a respectful distance. The king had provided them with a generous purse of gold, his starting stipend, and a sealed letter bearing his royal crest, Adre. SSED to the master of the Adventurers Guild. Sword Maiden held the letter in her hands as if it were a holy relic. You have a habit, she said, her voice soft and melodic, breaking the comfortable silence, of walking into the most powerful rooms in the kingdom and turning them on their head. Naruto chuckled, the sound easy and unburdened. I wasn't trying to. I just told the truth. Seemed like the simplest way to handle it. Simplicity, from a man who can create an army of himself, is a profound form of complexity, she mused. She stopped, turning to face him, her sightless eyes conveying a depth of emotion that a seeing person might have masked. I must return to the temple. My people need me. The restoration is far from complete, even with the impossible help you rendered. Naruto's expression softened. Of course, they need their leader. And you, she continued, her voice dropping slightly, you are truly set on this path. To become an adventurer. To start from nothing when you were offered so much. It's not nothing, he countered gently. It's everything. A chance to learn this world from the ground up. To help the people who fall through the cracks. That's a foundation, not a step down. He saw the faint worry that creased her brow. Hey, he said, his voice dropping to a more personal, reassuring tone. I'm not going to disappear. The capital has the biggest guild hall, right? I'll be based here for a while. The temple isn't that far. I can visit. The simple offer, I can visit, resonated with her more deeply than any vow of fealty to a king. It was a promise of connection. A thread of friendship that would not be severed by distance or duty. I would like that very much, Naruto Uzumaki, she said, a genuine, radiant smile blooming on her face. The doors of the Grand Temple will always be open to you. You are, and always will be, our most honored guest. She reached out, and her hand found his arm. Her touch was light, but it conveyed a universe of gratitude, respect, and a burgeoning affection that was as pure as it was profound. She held on for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, a silent communication that passed between them, a final affirmation of the bond forged in the crucible of the siege. Then, with a graceful nod, she turned and allowed Sir Kale to help her into the carriage. Naruto watched them go, the carriage and its two loyal guards disappearing into the throng of the city street. For a moment, the sheer, crushing reality of his situation settled on him. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a world that was not his own. With no clear path home. The faces of his friends, Sakura, Kakashi, Hinata, his children, flashed through his mind, a sharp, poignant ache that he had been holding at bay with constant action. He let out a long, slow breath, allowing the feeling to wash over him without consuming him. He had survived loneliness before. He would survive it again. And he wasn't truly without a goal. He had a new path, a new purpose. Right here, right now. He turned, the sealed letter from the king held loosely in his hand, and looked for the largest, rowdiest-looking building he could find. He didn't have to look far. The Adventurers Guild Hall was less a building and more a contained storm. The moment Naruto pushed through the heavy, scarred oak doors, he was hit by a wall of sound and smell. The roar of 100 conversations, punctuated by booming laughter, the clang of mugs, and the occasional shout of a challenge, filled the air. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of spilled ale, cheap tobacco, sweating bodies, roasting meat, and the faint, metallic tang of old blood on worn leather. It was a place of raw, boisterous, and desperate energy. The main hall was a vast, open space, its rafters dark with age and smoke. Rough-hewn wooden tables were crammed together, filled with men and women of every shape, size, and race he had only read about in Jiraiya's scrolls. Grizzled dwarves with beards braided into intricate patterns argued over maps with tall, elegant elves whose serene expressions seemed at odds with the chaos around them. Hulking lizardmen, their scales shimmering in the lamplight, sat silently nursing massive tankards. And humans, so many humans, young, bright-eyed youths with cheap, new leather armor and dreams of glory, and old, scarred veterans with haunted eyes and the thousand-yard stare of those who had seen too much. Naruto's sage mode, which he kept active at a low, almost subconscious level, gave him an even deeper insight. He could feel the currents of emotion swirling through the room, the bright, sharp sparks of ambition and hope from the newcomers, the steady, banked embers of resolve and weariness from the veterans, the greedy, flickering flames of avarice from the sellswords, and the cold, hard stones of fear and trauma that lay buried deep within almost everyone. This hall was a nexus of humanities and non-humanities struggle against the darkness of their world. He navigated the throng, his movements fluid and unobtrusive, drawing a few curious glances due to his strange, brightly colored clothes but otherwise ignored. He made his way to the long counter at the far end of the hall, where a massive quest board, plastered with parchments of varying sizes and colors, was the center of attention. Behind the counter, a line of clerks worked with frantic efficiency, stamping documents, weighing out coins, and dealing with the endless stream of adventurers. It was there he saw her. She stood out from the other clerks, not because of any overt beauty. Though she was certainly pleasant-looking with her neat brown hair tied back in a practical bun and her warm, intelligent eyes. It was her aura of calm, competent control amidst the chaos. While her colleagues seemed harried and overwhelmed, she moved with a serene purposefulness. She listened patiently to a belligerent dwarf complaining about his pay, her expression never wavering. Before pointing out a clause in his contract with a polite but firm finger, ending the argument instantly. Then, she turned to a young, nervous-looking girl in porcelain white armor, offering her a kind, encouraging smile and a simple quest, a delivery to a nearby town, that was perfectly suited to her rank. This woman, Naruto realized, was the anchor of this entire chaotic operation. She was Guild Girl. He waited his turn, observing her. He saw the faint, almost invisible lines of fatigue around her eyes, the way she would subtly massage her temples when she thought no one was looking. He felt the genuine empathy that radiated from her as she spoke to the younger adventurers, and the professional respect she afforded the veterans. She cared, deeply, about these people, and the weight of that care was a heavy one. Finally, He was at the front of the line. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the din. Guild girl looked up, her professional smile already in place. "Welcome to the Adventurers Guild. Are you here to register, or to post a—" She stopped, her eyes taking in his appearance. The bright orange was the first thing she noticed, a stark contrast to the drab browns and grays of most adventurers' gear. Then she saw his face, his sun-gold hair, the strange whisker marks, and the calm, confident way he held himself. He didn't have the nervous energy of a rookie or the jaded weariness of a veteran. He was something different. "Request," she finished, a little more slowly. "To register," Naruto said, offering a friendly smile. "I was told this is the place to do it." He placed the king's letter on the counter. The heavy parchment, the pristine wax, and the unmistakable imprint of the royal lion crest made a soft thud that seemed to cut through the noise around them. Guild girl stared at the letter. Her professional smile faltered, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Clerks and adventurers nearby, who had noticed the royal seal, fell silent, their conversations tapering off as they craned their necks to see. A letter of personal recommendation from the king himself was unheard of. It was like a god personally endorsing a new priest. She picked up the letter with hands that were suddenly very careful. "One moment," she whispered, and then turned and disappeared through a door behind the counter, the letter held like a sacred text. The hush that had fallen over their section of the counter spread. Whispers started to fly. Who was the stranger in the orange clothes? A nobleman's son playing at being an adventurer? A secret member of the Royal Knights? A foreign dignitary? A few minutes later, Guild girl returned, followed by a stern-looking older man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and the tired eyes of a lifelong administrator. This was the guild master, a man who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. Or so he thought. "You are Naruto Uzumaki?" the guild master asked, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. He held the now open letter. "That's me," Naruto confirmed. The guild master studied him, his gaze sharp and assessing. "His Majesty speaks of you in glowing terms. He says you single-handedly averted a national crisis at the Grand Temple. He recommends you for immediate registration and waives all fees and preliminary tests." He lowered the letter, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The king does not bestow such praise lightly. Or ever, in my experience." The archbishop was in a tough spot, Naruto said with a shrug. "I was happy to help." The guild master grunted, a sound of grudging acceptance. He turned to guild girl. "Register him. By the king's request, he can be started at any rank he wishes. Silver, even gold, given the alleged circumstances." His sent another wave of murmurs through the onlookers. A direct entry to gold rank. It was an insult to every adventurer who had bled and struggled for years to climb the ladder. A few of the tougher-looking veterans in steel and silver armor began to glare openly at Naruto, their expressions hostile. Naruto saw the glares and understood. He had come here to earn his place, not to have it handed to him. "Thank you for the offer," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But I'll start at the beginning. Porcelain rank, same as everyone else." If his arrival with the king's letter had caused a stir, this statement caused a tidal wave of confusion. The glares of the veterans softened into looks of bafflement. The rookies stared at him as if he had sprouted a second head. Who, in their right mind, would turn down a chance to skip the brutal, thankless grind of the lower ranks? The guild master raised an eyebrow, a genuine flicker of surprise in his old eyes. "You wish to start at porcelain? The rank for goblin slaying and sewer rat extermination. Everyone has to start somewhere," Naruto said with a smile. "And from what I've heard, even the small jobs can cause big problems if no one's there to do them." The guild master stared at him for a long moment, then a slow, rare smile touched his lips. He gave a sharp nod. "As you wish. I respect a man who isn't afraid of hard work. Guild girl, issue him a porcelain tag." He turned and walked back to his office, leaving a profoundly intrigued guild girl to handle the paperwork. She worked quickly, her initial shock replaced by a deep and growing curiosity. She took his name, his vague place of origin, and had him sign the guild's liability waivers. As she prepared his new registration tag, a small, plain ceramic disc, she found her professional composure slipping. "Why?" She asked, unable to stop herself. No one would turn down a chance to start at silver. Porcelain rank it's a meat grinder. The pay is terrible, the quests are thankless. And more rookies die in their first year than in all the other ranks combined. The Archbishop told me that goblins are considered a rookie's first test, Naruto said, his expression becoming more serious. She also told me what they do. It sounds to me like fighting them isn't a job for rookies who are still learning how to hold a sword. It's a job for someone who can make sure it gets done right. And that no one gets hurt. Guild Girl stopped what she was doing and looked at him. Truly looked at him. In her years behind the counter, she had heard every reason for becoming an adventurer: glory, gold, revenge, a desire to be a hero. But she had never heard anyone express it in quite those terms. He wasn't talking about the glory of slaying monsters, he was talking about the responsibility of protecting people from them. He was taking the lowest, most despised of quests, not as a stepping stone, but as a duty. A faint warmth bloomed in her chest. For the first time, she saw past the strange clothes and the royal recommendation and saw the man himself. And she was deeply, profoundly impressed. "Here you are," she said, her voice a little softer than before. She handed him the porcelain tag. "Welcome to the guild, Naruto-san." "Thanks," he said, taking the tag. "Now, about those goblin quests." He turned to the quest board. Most of the parchments were for deliveries. Beast subjugations, giant rats, dire wolves, and escort duties. But in a small, crowded section at the bottom, marked with a crude drawing of a goblin's head, were the quests no one else wanted. He scanned them quickly, his eyes absorbing the details. Goblin patrol on the North Road. Goblins harassing miners at the Stonefall Quarry. Goblins stealing livestock from the Miller farm. His eyes stopped on one. It was an older parchment, the ink slightly faded, suggesting it had been on the board for a while. Urgent request. Goblin nest near the Barrow Hills. Repeated attacks on the Hawthorne farmstead. Last party failed to return. Reward: 30 gold pieces. 30 gold was a decent sum for a porcelain quest, a clear sign of the owner's desperation. But the key phrase was, "last party failed to return." That was a death sentence for most rookies. It was why the parchment was still there. "I'll take this one," Naruto said, pulling the parchment from the board. He brought it back to the counter, where Guild Girl's newfound respect was immediately replaced by a surge of alarm. "Naruto-san, no, not that one. That's a trap. Old man Hawthorne is a good man, but his farm is in a bad spot. 2 porcelain parties have taken that quest in the last month. 8 adventurers. None of them came back. We were about to reclassify it as a steel rank quest and post a higher reward." "Then it's a good thing I'm taking it now," Naruto said calmly. "Before a steel rank party gets in over their heads too." "But you're just one person. A new registrant," she protested, her concern genuine and palpable. "You can't go alone." "He won't be." A new voice, crisp and melodic as a silver bell, chimed in. Naruto turned. Standing behind him was a trio of adventurers who looked as out of place in the guild hall as he did. The one who had spoken was a high elf, impossibly slender and graceful, with silver hair so long it almost brushed the floor and eyes the color of new spring leaves. Her leather armor was light and minimalist, designed for speed and silence, and a magnificent longbow was slung over her shoulder. She radiated an ancient, almost feral energy, a deep connection to the wild places of the world. Beside her, a dwarf shaman grunted, his stout frame solid as a mountain. His long, gray beard was intricately braided and clasped with rune-etched stones. He leaned on a gnarled wooden staff and puffed on a small pipe, a cloud of sweet-smelling smoke wreathing his head. He looked at Naruto with the shrewd, appraising eyes of someone who had seen 1,000 seasons come and go. Completing the trio was a lizardman priest, a towering, reptilian figure whose scaled hide was a deep, forest green. He wore the simple robes of a holy man and held a warrior's spear. His yellow, slitted eyes blinked slowly, but they missed nothing. He carried an air of calm, reptilian patience. "Apologies for eavesdropping," the high elf said, her gaze fixed on Naruto, a flicker of intense curiosity in her green eyes. "But we couldn't help but overhear. My name is Archer. This is Dwarf Shaman, and this is Lizard Priest. We just finished a contract, and we find ourselves at loose ends. A troublesome goblin nest sounds like a fine way to stretch the legs. You want to come with me? Naruto asked, surprised. Indeed, she said with a sharp, predatory smile. You carry the scent of the deep woods on you, human. A scent of wind and leaf and clean earth. It is unusual. I wish to see what a man who smells of the forest can do in a goblin's dark hole. Dwarf shaman took a puff from his pipe. HMPH. The elf is bored, he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. But the lass behind the counter is right. That quest has a bad stink to it. Goblins that can take down 2 parties of 4 are clever goblins. Better to face them with more blades than less. My spells are at your service. Lizard Priest simply nodded his massive head. The Earth Mother smiles on those who protect the herd, he hissed softly. His voice a dry rustle of leaves. Your intent is honorable. We will lend our strength to your cause. Guild Girl looked from Naruto to the new trio with immense relief. This party was a well-known and respected silver-ranked team. They were seasoned professionals. With them along, Naruto might actually stand a chance. Naruto looked at the 3 of them. An elf, a dwarf, and a lizard man. It was like a page out of a storybook. He could feel their energies. The wild, free-flowing chakra of the elf, the solid, grounded power of the dwarf, and the calm, ancient strength of the lizard man. They were strong. More than that, they felt reliable. All right, he said with a grin. The more the merrier. My name's Naruto. It's a pleasure to meet you all. He had come to the Gwei LD expecting to start his new life alone. Instead, in the space of an hour, he had turned down a barony, baffled an entire hall of adventurers, impressed the one person who kept the place running, and acquired a party of seasoned non-human veterans for his very first quest. His life in this world, he decided, was going to be anything but boring. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Lay of the Land, the Scent of the Hunt. The journey to the Hawthorne farmstead was a study in contrasts. The city, with its noise, its politics, and its overwhelming press of humanity, gave way to rolling green hills and the quiet, breathing presence of the wilderness. For Naruto, it was like stepping out of a stuffy, overcrowded room and into the clean, open air. The natural energy here was purer, less cluttered by the psychic residue of thousands of minds. He walked, foregoing the offer of a horse, his senses open, drinking in the new world. His new companions were a puzzle he was slowly piecing together. They moved with the easy, practiced economy of a team that had faced death together many times. High Elf Archer, true to her name, glided at the head of their small procession, her movements as silent and fluid as a forest cat. Her eyes, the color of moss and spring leaves, were never still, constantly scanning the tree line, the sky, the very texture of the path ahead. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in short, clipped statements. Ridge up ahead. Good vantage point. Carrion bird circling to the west. Old kill. She was a creature of the hunt, and Naruto felt a strange kinship with her connection to the natural world. Even if hers was born of millennia of instinct and his was a learned, divine art. Dwarf shaman trudged along with the solid, indefatigable rhythm of moving rock. He grew. MB led constantly under his breath, about the quality of the road, the humidity in the air, the regrettable lack of good ale, but it was a comfortable, background noise, like a crackling hearth. His shrewd eyes, however, missed nothing. Noting the composition of the soil, the stability of a rock face, the kinds of ore that might lie buried deep beneath their feet. He was the anchor of the group, grow. NDED in the substance of the world itself. Lizard Priest was a silent, towering presence. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his spear held at a perfect, balanced ready. While the elf scanned the horizon and the dwarf studied the ground, the Lizard Priest seemed to be listening to a different frequency. He would occasionally tilt his great reptilian head, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. His slow blinking eyes seeming to look past the physical world and into the spirit of it. He was their moral and spiritual compass, a point of calm contemplation in a violent profession. They, in turn, were observing him. Naruto knew this. He could feel their subtle, probing senses on him. The elf's sharp eyes trying to decipher his gait, the dwarf's occasional glances trying to gauge his sturdiness, the lizard man's patient, unwavering observation. They were professionals, and he was the unknown variable, the porcelain rookie with a king's endorsement and a reputation that sounded like a bard's tall tale. He didn't mind. He let them watch. The truth would come out soon enough. You do not carry a proper weapon, human San, lizard priest noted, his sibilant voice a dry rustle. He had stopped for a midday meal of dried meat and hard cheese. Naruto, who was sitting cross-legged and perfectly balanced on a round boulder, just smiled. I have what I need, he said, holding up his hands. High Elf Archer, who was perched on a high branch of a nearby oak, watching the surroundings, scoffed softly. Fists against goblin blades. You're either a fool or you're hiding something, flat nose. Maybe a little of both. Naruto replied cheerfully, unoffended by the casual insult. HMPH. A strong back is good, but a sharp axe is better, dwarf shaman grumbled, tapping his own bearded axe. Best to have both. He looked at the pouch of food Naruto was eating. It wasn't the guild-issued rations. It was a small, sealed container he'd produced from a scroll. Inside was a steaming bowl of noodles. The dwarf's nose twitched. What in the name of the Forge Father's beard is that? Ramen, Naruto said reverently. A gift from the Archbishop. Food of the gods. The trio exchanged a look of profound bafflement. This human was an enigma of the highest order. As they drew closer to the Barrow Hills, the landscape began to change. The gentle, rolling hills gave way to steeper, more rugged terrain. The trees grew darker and more twisted, and the earth was dotted with mounds of grass-covered earth, the barrows. They were ancient burial sites, silent and solemn, and Naruto could feel the deep, dormant energy of the long-dead slumbering within them. But now, that slumber was disturbed. A foul, chaotic energy, the signature of goblins, clung to the area like a greasy film. High Elf Archer's nose wrinkled in disgust. Stinkers. They've made their den here. No respect for the dead. The dead do not care, Lizard Priest stated calmly. But the living who are threatened by them do. They found the Hawthorne farmstead nestled in a small, defensible valley, or what was once defensible. It was a grim sight. The fields were trampled and fallow. A barn had been partially burned, its blackened timbers stark against the sky. The farmhouse itself was boarded up, its windows like vacant, fearful eyes. The only sign of life was a thin trickle of smoke from the chimney. An old man with a face like a dried apple and a back bent by a lifetime of labor stood in the doorway, a rusty pitchfork held in his gnarled hands. His eyes, watery and pale, were filled with a mixture of terror and desperate hope when he saw them. The guild, he croaked, his voice thin and reedy. They sent you. That they did, dwarf shaman said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. 4 of us, we're here to take care of your goblin problem. Old man Hawthorne's gaze fell on Naruto's porcelain tag, and his face fell. A rookie. By the gods, they send children to die. He then took in the silver ranks of the others. And a flicker of hope returned. But you 3, you are veterans. There is a chance. He lowered the pitchfork, his shoulders slumping. They come at night. They took my son's family. His wife, his little girl, dragged them off screaming. The last party of adventurers, they went into the barrows after them. They never came back. I hear things from the mounds at night. Horrible things. Naruto's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, still intensity that made the air around him seem to drop a few degrees. He placed a gentle hand on the old man's shoulder. That stops tonight, he said, his voice low and imbued with an absolute certainty that was more comforting than any boast. I promise you. Where is the entrance they're using? The farmer pointed a trembling finger towards the largest of the barrows, a great mound of earth that dominated the nearby hillside, a single, dark opening like a wound in its side. They're thicker than fleas on a stray dog. Cunning, too. They set traps. The last adventurers, they didn't even make it past the entrance. Naruto's orange eyes, glowing with the power of his sage mode, focused on the barrow. He didn't just see a hill with a hole in it. He saw the network of tunnels inside, the flow of air, the heat signatures of the creatures within. He saw the crude tripwires and the pressure plates the farmer had mentioned. And he saw so much more. They haven't just infested that one, he said quietly. They've connected it to the others. There are at least 5 mounds linked by tunnels. And there are hidden entrances. High Elf Archer stared at him, her sharp eyes wide with surprise. How can you know that? Not even my eyes can see through a hill. Your eyes see the surface, Naruto said, tapping his temple. I feel the shape of what's beneath. There are over 100 of them in there. 10, no, 12, or bigger. Hobgoblins, probably, and there's one in the central chamber. Bigger than the rest. A champion, maybe. His 3 companions were silent. They were looking at him in a new light. To map out an entire enemy fortress, sight unseen, was a skill that bordered on divination. E King's letter was starting to make a terrifying amount of sense. The main entrance is a death trap, Naruto continued, his mind already formulating a strategy. A bottleneck designed to funnel intruders into a killing zone. We're not going in that way. He pointed to a smaller, unassuming barrow on the flank of the main one. There's a secondary entrance there. It's collapsed, but only partially. The goblins use it as a ventilation shaft. It's unguarded. You want us to crawl through a goblin bolt hole? Dwarf shaman grumbled. It will put us deep inside their nest, behind their main guard post, Naruto explained. We can strike from the heart and work our way out. They'll never see it coming. It was a bold, risky plan. But it was also brilliant. High Elf Archer found herself nodding in agreement. A strange feeling of excitement stirring within her. This rookie, this flat nose, thought like a predator. Very well, she said, her voice sharp with anticipation. Lead the way. They moved as dusk began to settle, the sky turning a bruised purple and orange. Naruto led them to the smaller barrow, where a tangle of thorny bushes concealed a narrow, almost invisible fissure in the earth. The air that puffed from it was foul, carrying the rank stench of the goblin den. I'll go first and clear the way, Naruto whispered. Lizard Priest, you're the largest, you'll be last. He created a single shadow clone without a sound. My clone will stay with the farmer. It will guard him and alert me if any goblins come out of the main entrance. The clone nodded and melted back into the shadows towards the farmhouse. The 3 veterans watched the seamless, silent creation and deployment with expressions of utter astonishment. This was not magic. This was something else entirely. Naruto slipped into the fissure as silently as smoke. The tunnel was tight, forcing him to crawl. The darkness was absolute, but to his senses, it was as clear as day. He moved forward 20 feet and found what he was looking for. A crude deadfall trap, a massive, precariously balanced rock held by a single, fraying rope connected to a tripwire. He didn't disarm it, he simply reached out a hand to the earthen wall beside it and phased through, bypassing it completely. He emerged on the other side and continued on. He reached the end of the narrow tunnel, which opened into a larger, goblin-carved passage. 2 goblin sentries stood there, their backs to him, peering down the main tunnel towards the entrance he had bypassed. They were complaining to each other in their guttural tongue. Without a sound, Naruto formed 2 miniature Rasengans, one in each hand, and pressed them against the back of the goblins' skulls. There was a faint, wet crunch, and the 2 creatures dropped without a sound. He waved the others forward. They emerged into the passage, their eyes wide with the grim reality of the nest. The walls were smeared with filth and crude symbols. The floor was littered with gnawed bones, animal and, sickeningly, humanoid. The main guard post is just around this bend, Naruto whispered, pointing. 8 of them, hogs, waiting for someone to come through the front door. I can put an arrow through the leader's eye from here, High Elf Archer whispered back, already knocking an arrow. No, Naruto countered. An arrow is loud. They'll hear the body drop. We do this clean, all at once. He looked at his team. Dwarf shaman, can you cause a small tremor? Just enough to distract them for a second. The dwarf grinned, his teeth white in the gloom. I can make the very stones sing for you, lad. Good. Lizard Priest, your spear has reach. You and the dwarf take the 3 on the right. Archer, you take the 2 on the left. I'll handle the 3 in the middle. It was a battlefield command, given with a quiet authority that none of them thought to question. They simply nodded, their professional instincts taking over. Naruto gave the signal. Dwarf shaman tapped the butt of his staff on the floor and muttered a single, stony word. A low, deep vibration ran through the ground, accompanied by the sound of pebbles skittering down the passage ahead. As one, the hobgoblins turned towards the sound, their weapons raised. In that instant, the party struck. They moved like four shadows with a single purpose. High Elf Archer was a blur, her long knife flashing twice, slit two throats before the Hobbs even registered her presence. Dwarf Shaman's axe cleaved through a helmet and a skull with a single, brutal chop, while Lizard Priest's spear darted out like a serpent's tongue, impaling two more through their hearts. Naruto was even faster. He was a whisper of orange and black, flowing between the three central hobgoblins. There were no grand jutsu, no flashy techniques. Just the brutal, efficient poetry of taijutsu. A palm heel strike to a chin, snapping a neck. A knife hand chop to a collarbone, shattering it. An elbow to the back of a skull, ending the final one's life before it could even turn. It was over in 3 seconds. 8 elite hobgoblin guards were dead, and not a single alarm had been raised. The 3 silver rankers stood amidst the carnage, breathing a little heavily. Then they looked at Naruto. He was standing calmly, not even winded, wiping a single speck of black blood from his knuckle. He had dispatched 3 hobgoblins, bare-handed, in the time it had taken each of them to kill their targets with weapons. High Elf Archer stared, her bow held loosely in her hand. The sheer speed and lethality of his movements were unlike anything she had ever witnessed. He moved with the wind, struck like lightning. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a force of nature. A strange, exhilarating shiver ran down her spine. The scent of the forest he had detected on him, she was beginning to understand. It was the scent of a predator that was so far above the rest of the food chain that it lived by its own rules. The central chamber is this way, Naruto said, his voice pulling them from their stunned silence. That's where the rest of them are. And that's where they're keeping the prisoners. He turned and led the way deeper into the darkness, leaving his 3 highly experienced, suddenly very humbled companions to follow in his wake. They had come on this quest to help a promising rookie. They were beginning to realize that they were the ones who had been brought along as backup. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A Song of Steel, a Sermon of Silence. The tunnels leading to the heart of the nest were a descent into a crude and vicious hell. The air grew thick and cloying, a palpable miasma of filth that clung to the back of the throat. The walls, once the smooth, cool earth of the barrow, were now slick with grime and nameless effluence. Crude, mocking parodies of human faces were carved into the dirt, their leering eyes following the party's silent progress. For High Elf Archer, whose senses were attuned to the clean, living pulse of the forest, it was a physical assault. She moved with her jaw tight, her expression one of cold, focused fury. This was a violation, a cancer in the earth, and she yearned to cut it out. Naruto remained the tip of their spear, a silent, golden-haired ghost flowing through the oppressive darkness. His sage mode was a lantern in the gloom, illuminating the path ahead not with light, but with an unerring sense of presence. He guided them around another pressure plate connected to a volley of sharpened stakes, pointed out a goblin hiding in an alcove with a silent hand gesture, and led them rough the labyrinthine tunnels with the confidence of a man walking through his own home. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. To his companions, who were relying on faint torchlight and their own straining senses, his guidance was nothing short of miraculous. Chamber ahead, he whispered, his voice a bare disturbance of the foul air. It's the main one. Big, full. He flattened himself against the wall at the tunnel's mouth. Peering around the edge, the others took up positions behind him, their weapons at the ready. What they saw stole the breath from their lungs and replaced it with ice. It was a vast, circular burial chamber, the final resting place of some long-forgotten chieftain. The ceiling arched high overhead, supported by thick, rune-carved pillars of stone. But the sanctity of the place had been violently, grotesquely desecrated. A massive, roaring bonfire raged in the center of the room, casting a flickering, hellish light that made the shadows dance like monstrous puppets. Dozens of goblins, perhaps 60 or 70 of them, capered and shrieked around the flames, their forms twisted and hunched in the demonic glow. The floor was a carpet of refuse, broken weapons, and the skeletal remains of past victims. At the far end of the chamber, on a raised dais where a sarcophagus once rested, a crude altar of bone and black, mud-caked stone had been erected. Chained to it, limp and terrified, were a human woman and a small girl, the farmer's family. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. Standing over them was not one leader, but two. One was a creature of brute force. A goblin champion. It was a hulking monster, even larger than the Lord Naruto had dispatched beneath the temple. Its skin was a deep, diseased green, scarred and covered in crude iron plates bolted directly to its hide. In one massive fist, it clutched a colossal club, a sharpened log studded with shards of rock and metal. It stood guard, its single, malevolent eye scanning the mob with possessive arrogance. But the true center of power in the room was the second figure. It was a goblin shaman, a withered, stooped thing clad in rags and adorned with the bones of its victims. It was perched atop the altar, its long, spindly arms raised to the ceiling. It wasn't participating in the chaotic revelry. It was chanting, a high, piercing, monotonous drone that grated on the nerves. The words in a language so foul it felt like it was physically scraping the inside of their skulls. A sickly, purple-black energy, visible even to the naked eye, was coalescing in the air above the shaman. Swirling like a storm cloud of pure malice. A ritual, dwarf shaman breathed, his voice tight with alarm. By my father's forge, they're not just nesting. They're summoning. The woman and child are the sacrifice, lizard priest hissed, his usual calm replaced by a cold, holy anger. We must not permit this. High elf archer's knuckles were white on her bowstring. That champion is the guard dog. We can't get to the shaman without going through it. And the mob will swarm us the moment we show ourselves. The situation was dire. A frontal assault was suicide. They would be bogged down by the horde long before they could reach the altar. You're right, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. He turned to them, and in the flickering firelight, his orange, slitted pupils seemed to burn with an internal fire. So we don't give them the chance. He looked at High Elf Archer. When I move, put an arrow in the shaman's throat. Don't kill it, just make it stop chanting. He looked at the dwarf and lizard priest. The champion is yours. Keep it busy. Don't try to kill it, just tie it up. Use the pillars for cover. And the mob? The dwarf asked, his hand tightening on his axe. There are dozens of them, lad. Naruto smiled, and it was a terrifying sight, a flash of predatory glee that promised absolute annihilation. The mob, he said, is mine. Before they could ask what he meant, he acted. He formed a single hand sign, a cross-shaped seal they had never seen before. Sage art. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. The tunnel behind them exploded with silent, instantaneous creation. In the space of a single heartbeat, where there had been one Naruto, there were now 200. They filled the passage, a silent, disciplined army of orange and black. Each one's face set in the same expression of cold, deadly resolve as the original. The silver-ranked adventurers found themselves pressed against the walls, suddenly adrift in a sea of golden-haired warriors. Go, the original Naruto commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The effect on the goblin horde was one of pure, mind-shattering shock. One moment, they were celebrating their foul rights. The next, a veritable flood of identical, determined enemies poured from the tunnel mouth, not as a chaotic charge, but as a disciplined, multi-pronged assault. High Elf Archer reacted on pure instinct. Her bow came up, she drew and released in a single, fluid motion. The arrow, a silver streak of vengeance, flew across the cavern. It did not strike the shaman's throat. The creature, sensing the danger, flinched at the last second. But the arrow did its job, sinking deep into the shaman's shoulder, eliciting a piercing shriek of pain and, most importantly, breaking its concentration. The chanting stopped. The swirling vortex of dark energy above the altar wavered, its growth halted. Simultaneously, dwarf shaman stomped his foot, and a wall of solid stone erupted from the ground, providing them with a barrier as they charged into the room. Lizard priest let out a hissing battle cry and slammed his spear against the stone, a challenge to the hulking goblin champion. The champion roared, a sound of pure fury, and charged them, its massive club swinging. The dwarf and the lizard priest met its charge, their silver-ranked experience showing as they worked in perfect tandem, one hairy, one striking, using their superior agility and tactics to avoid the monster's devastating but slow attacks. But the main battle, the real storm, was in the center of the chamber. The 60-plus goblins, recovering from their shock, charged the wave of clones with screeches of rage. It was a slaughter. But not for the clones. Naruto's army didn't fight like adventurers, hacking and slashing. They fought like shinobi. They moved with blinding speed, a whirlwind of fists, feet, and crackling blue spheres of energy. A clone would engage a goblin, dodge a clumsy swing of a rusted sword, and answer with a devastating palm strike that crushed the creature's chest. Another would leap over the front lines, a Rasengan in hand, and detonate it in the midst of a packed group, sending bodies flying. They worked in teams, flanking, feinting, overwhelming the chaotic goblin mob with disciplined, brutally efficient violence. The goblins' numerical superiority, their greatest strength, was rendered utterly meaningless. They were drowning in a sea of unrelenting, perfectly coordinated opponents. The original Naruto, meanwhile, was not engaged in the melee. He was a golden blur, running along the cavern wall, his feet sticking to the vertical surface as if it were flat ground. He was making a direct line for the altar, his target the wounded shaman. The shaman, clutching the arrow in its shoulder, saw him coming. It let out a terrified screech and pointed a bony finger at him. A bolt of sickly, green-black energy, crackling with necrotic power, shot from its fingertip. Naruto didn't even break stride. He formed a Rasengan in his free hand and simply thrust it forward, intercepting the bolt. The raw, spinning power of the Rasengan met the crude dark magic and obliterated it. The two energies annihilating each other in a flash of violent light. He leapt from the wall, soaring over the heads of the combatants below, and landed silently on the altar behind the shaman. The creature spun around, its face a mask of terror, and tried to unleash another spell. It was too slow. Naruto's hand shot out, not in a strike, but in a precise grip, his fingers clamping around the shaman's face. "It's over," he said. His voice cold, he poured a surge of pure, cleansing sage chakra directly into the creature. To the goblin, whose entire being was a conduit for foul, chaotic energies, the touch of pure, balanced natural energy was agony. It convulsed, its bones rattling, and then, with a final, choked gasp, its life force was simply extinguished. It went limp, its inner evil snuffed out like a candle flame. Naruto tossed the body aside and turned to the captives, his hand glowing with gentle green medical chakra to break their chains. But as he did, a shadow fell over him. The battle below had momentarily ceased. The clones held their ground, and the few remaining goblins stared in terror. The dwarf and the lizard priest had been thrown back by a final, desperate swing of the champion's club. The wavering portal above the altar, no longer controlled by the shaman but not yet closed, suddenly pulsed. It swelled, stabilized, and a low, guttural moan, a sound of ancient hunger from a place beyond the stars, echoed through the chamber. From the swirling vortex of darkness, something began to emerge. It was not a goblin. It was a writhing mass of slick, black tentacles, studded with weeping yellow eyes and snapping, tooth-lined maws. A foul, otherworldly stench of brine and decay filled the chamber. This was what the shaman had been summoning. A lesser horror from the void. A creature of chaos and madness that had no place in the physical world. Dwarf shaman stared, his face pale beneath his beard. Forge fire and damnation. What is that thing? Void spawn. High elf archer breathed from her perch, her knuckles white. I've only read of them in the oldest texts. Not even a gold-ranked party would face such a thing. The creature's tentacles lashed out, smashing against the stone pillars, which cracked and groaned under the impossible force. The few remaining goblins were snatched up, screaming, and pulled into the snapping maws. The silver rankers were frozen, not by fear, but by the sheer, overwhelming hopelessness of the situation. This was a threat beyond their scale, beyond their comprehension. Their swords and arrows were useless against such a being. But Naruto was not frozen. He looked up at the abomination, at the terrified faces of the woman and child behind him, and his expression settled into one of utter, absolute resolve. He had not come to this world to be defeated by a glorified octopus. He brought his hands together in a single clap. All 200 of his clones below, as one, looked up at him. And then, they all began to glow. They dissolved, not into smoke, but into pure, golden sage chakra, which streamed from their bodies and flowed up towards the original, who stood on the altar like a conductor in a symphony of power. The energy converged on him. A maelstrom of golden light. High Elf Archer had to shield her eyes, the sheer brilliance of it was like looking into the sun. The air crackled, the very stones of the barrow humming with a power they were never meant to contain. Naruto raised his right hand. Above it, a colossal sphere of swirling, blade-like chakra began to form, fed by the immense power of his clones. It was a spinning vortex of wind, so fast and so sharp it shrieked, a sound that tore through the air, a sound that promised utter annihilation. Sage Art. Massive Recentrican. It was a miniature sun of destructive power. A perfect storm held in the palm of his hand. The void spawn seemed to sense the danger, its many eyes fixing on him, its tentacles lashing out in a frenzy. Get down, Naruto yelled to his companions. He threw it. The Recentrican flew, not with a straight trajectory, but with a will of its own. It met the void spawn, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the shriek of the wind blades intensified 1,000-fold. The creature was not cut, it was unmade. At a microscopic, cellular level, it was being sliced apart by countless blades of wind. It let out a silent, psychic scream of agony as its form dissolved, its tentacles turning to black dust, its eyes imploding into nothingness. The sphere of destruction then expanded, engulfing the altar, the bonfire, the entire central chamber. The stone pillars vaporized, the ceiling cracked, the very foundations of the barrow groaned in protest. Naruto appeared in a flash of movement beside his companions. The rescued woman and child held safely in his arms. Time to go. He slammed his hand on the floor, and a wave of earth rose up, forming a protective dome over the five of them just as the entire central chamber collapsed in on itself with a deafening, final roar, burying the last remnants of the goblins, the void spawn, and the desecrated altar under 1,000 tons of rock and soil. A moment later, Naruto pushed the rock shield away. They were standing in a newly formed cavern, the only exit a tunnel leading back the way they came. The silence was absolute. The battle, the ritual, the otherworldly horror, it was all gone. Erased in a single, terrifyingly powerful attack. Naruto gently set the woman and child down, who were too shocked to do anything but cling to each other. He then turned to his party. They were staring at him, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and a complete, fundamental re-evaluation of everything they thought they knew about the word power. High Elf Archer lowered her bow, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at the devastation, then back at the calm, golden-haired man standing before her. He wasn't a rookie. He wasn't a silver ranker, or a gold ranker. He was something else. Something on the level of the platinum heroes of legend, the ones who fought demon kings. And he had just joined their party for a porcelain-rank goblin quest. She met his calm, orange eyes. And for the first time, she truly saw him. She saw the immense, terrifying power held in perfect, gentle control. She saw the unwavering kindness that drove him to use that power to protect the helpless. The scent of the forest she'd smelled on him was wrong. It wasn't the scent of a predator. It was the scent of the forest itself, the unshakable strength of the ancient oaks, the unstoppable rush of the river. The cleansing fire of a lightning strike. She felt a feeling stir in her chest that was entirely new to her long, elven life, a profound, overwhelming, and slightly terrifying sense of awe. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Aftermath, Revelations, and a Quiet Drink. The silence on the return journey was heavier than the tons of earth that now entombed the goblin nest. It was a silence born not of tension or exhaustion, but of profound, reality-altering awe. The rescued mother and her small daughter, wrapped in the lizard priest's spare robes, walked between the dwarf and the towering reptile, a small, protected island of humanity in the shadow of their saviors. Naruto walked ahead with High Elf Archer, setting a slow, deliberate pace for the sake of the traumatized family. The air, now free of the goblin's foul taint, was clean and crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. High Elf Archer, who normally moved with the restless energy of a hawk, was unnervingly still. Her gaze was fixed on the back of the golden-haired man in front of her. She had seen ancient dragons level mountainsides, she had witnessed the fury of elemental spirits, but she had never seen anything like what she had just witnessed in that barrow. It was not the chaotic, world-breaking power of a monster. It was controlled, precise, and wielded with the calm certainty of a master craftsman. It was, in a word, terrifying. The energy, she began, Her voice, usually so sharp and melodic, was hesitant, almost soft. The light you gathered from your copies. It felt like the sun. Like the very heart of the forest in full bloom. She looked at him, her emerald eyes filled with a question that went far beyond mere curiosity. What is it? Naruto glanced back at her, his expression serene. The terrifying intensity of the battle had vanished, leaving behind the same warm, easygoing man from the guild hall. The contrast was jarring. It's called Sage Chakra, he answered simply. It's the energy of the world itself. The life force in the air, the water, the earth. I just borrow some of it and give it a shape. His explanation, meant to be simple, only deepened the mystery for her. To borrow the life force of the world itself. Elves lived in harmony with nature, they could coax it and listen to its whispers, but the idea of commanding its very essence and shaping it a miniature son of pure destruction was a concept so alien, so profound, it made her head spin. He spoke of it as if it were as simple as drawing water from a well. And your copies, she pressed. They are not illusions. They have substance. They fight. Shadow clones, he said. They're real, solid copies of me. We share thoughts, experiences. What they learn, I learn. She stopped walking, her mind grappling with the implications. An army of one, each soldier a perfect copy of the general, sharing tactics and information in real time. A being who could wield the very lifeblood of the planet as a weapon. The legends of the platinum-ranked heroes, the slayers of demon gods, suddenly seemed quaint. They reached the farmstead as the first true stars began to prick the deep velvet of the twilight sky. Old Man Hawthorne was waiting on his porch, the shadow clone Naruto had left behind standing a silent, unwavering vigil beside him. The moment the farmer saw his family, whole and alive, a choked, ragged sob broke from his chest. He ran to them, his old body moving with a speed born of pure love, and enveloped them in his arms. The clone gave the original Naruto a crisp nod. All quiet here. They seemed to have a few stragglers who tried to sneak out the front, but I dealt with them. With that, it vanished in a soft, soundless puff of smoke, leaving the old farmer to stare at the spot where it had been with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The reunion was a raw, beautiful thing. Naruto and his companions stood back, giving the family their space, a silent circle of guardians, witnessing the profound peace they had brought. After several long moments, the farmer, his face wet with tears, turned to them. He tried to speak, to offer thanks, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply bowed, a deep, profound gesture of gratitude that conveyed more than any words could. We have little, the rescued woman whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. But what we have is yours. Please, let us offer you a meal. It is all we have. We would be honored, Lizard Priest said, his deep voice filled with a gentle reverence. The meal was a simple affair, a stew of root vegetables and a little salted pork. Served with coarse, dark bread, but eaten in the warm, lamp-lit kitchen of the farmhouse, surrounded by the quiet, heartfelt gratitude of the family they had saved, it was more satisfying than any royal banquet. Naruto watched the little girl, who had been catatonic with fear, slowly begin to relax in the safety of her grandfather's presence, even managing a small, shy smile when Lizard Priest used his long, dexterous claws to carve a piece of wood into the shape of a tiny lizard for her. As they ate, Dwarf Shaman slipped outside. He returned a half-hour later, his face grim with effort. The barn's timbers were mostly ash, he grumbled, wiping soot from his beard. But I shored up the foundation and raised the main beams. It'll hold a roof now, at least. He had used his shamanistic connection to the earth, his stone-shaping magic, to mend what the goblins had tried to destroy. It was a quiet act of creation, a bookend to the overwhelming destruction in the barrow. And Naruto gave him a look of deep, appreciative respect. The journey back to the capital the next day was different. The silence was gone, replaced by a new, more comfortable rapport. The hierarchy of silver and porcelain had been shattered and discarded amidst the rubble of the barrow. They were simply four adventurers who had walked through fire together. High Elf Archer, her elven pride replaced by an insatiable curiosity, peppered Naruto with questions about his world. She didn't ask about his power anymore, but about the forest he came from, the trees, the animals. He described the massive, Ancient trees near Konoha, and she listened with rapt attention, a flicker of longing in her eyes for a world she could never see. Dwarf shaman, having decided that any man who could command such power and still enjoy a simple bowl of noodles was all right in his book, shared his pouch of expensive, sweet-smelling pipe weed with Naruto, teaching him how to pack the small, stone pipe he offered. They sat together during a rest stop, puffing smoke rings into the air while the dwarf explained the subtle arts of metallurgy and rune craft. Lizard Priest engaged him in a deeper conversation. Your power is like the sun, he hissed thoughtfully. It can scorch the land and bring ruin, or it can provide the warmth for life to flourish. You seem to walk this path of balance with ease, Naruto-san. I try, Naruto said, looking at his own hands. I've seen what happens when power like this is used for the wrong reasons. It's a heavy thing to carry. You just have to make sure you're carrying it for the right people. The lizard man nodded slowly, a deep, ancient wisdom in his reptilian eyes. A worthy sermon. When they finally walked back through the doors of the Adventurers Guild Hall, their entrance caused a wave of silence that spread from the door inward. All eyes were on them. The grizzled veterans, the hopeful rookies, the cynical sellswords, they all stopped what they were doing and stared. The Death Quest party had returned, and they had the rescued family with them to prove it. They made their way to the counter, a path clearing before them as if they were royalty. Guild Girl looked up, and the professional mask she wore dissolved into a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. Her eyes immediately found Naruto, a silent question within them. Are you all right? He gave her a small, reassuring nod. Quest slip, High Elf Archer said, her voice crisp and formal as she slapped the blood and grime-stained parchment onto the counter. Hawthorne Farmstead, nest located and destroyed, threat permanently eliminated, hostages recovered, safe and sound. Guild Girl's eyes widened as she took in the family standing behind them. You did it, she breathed. All of you. We had already written you off. Quote, the report was in error, the elf replied smoothly. The goblins were numerous, but poorly organized. She looked sideways at Naruto. And our porcelain companion proved to be surprisingly resourceful. It was a masterful understatement, a piece of professional discretion that Naruto deeply appreciated. She was protecting him, shielding his impossible power from the guild's bureaucracy and the jealous ears of other adventurers. She was claiming him as one of their own. Guild Girl stamped the parchment with a heavy, final thud. Reward of 30 gold pieces. Plus a 5 gold bonus from the guild for completing a hazardous return contract. She counted out the coins, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, but her eyes kept flicking to Naruto, a million questions behind her warm brown gaze. Naruto took the pouch of coins. He opened it, looked inside, and then, in full view of the entire gawking guild hall, he counted out 4 equal piles. He pushed one towards each of his companions and kept the last for himself. Wait, lad, Dwarf Shaman grumbled, though without any real heat. That's not how it works. You're porcelain. You get a half share. We're silver. We get full shares. We all fought, Naruto said simply, his voice carrying in the quiet hall. We all risked our lives. We all get an equal share. End of story. He met the eyes of his companions. And there was no room for argument in his gaze. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of principle. High Elf Archer looked at her pile of coins, then at Naruto, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her sharp features. She swept the coins into her pouch with a flick of her wrist. As you say, rookie. They found a corner booth in the tavern section of the hall, the quietest spot they could find. Mugs of ale were ordered, and for a few moments, they drank in a comfortable, weary silence. All right, Flat Nose, High Elf Archer said finally, setting her mug down with a soft click. No more secrets. We walked into hell with you and came back. We deserve the truth. What are you? Naruto took a long drink of his ale. He looked at the 3 faces watching him, the elf's intense curiosity, the dwarf's shrewd gaze, the lizard man's patient contemplation. They had earned it. I told you I wasn't from this world, he began softly. And that's the truth. I come from a different place. With a different kind of magic. We call it chakra. It's the energy inside of us, mixed with the energy of our spirit. We use it to do things. To run on water, to breathe fire, to make clones of ourselves. He paused. And some, like me, can learn to touch the energy of the world itself. The Sage Chakra. He told them a heavily edited version of his story, of being a warrior from a village hidden in the leaves. Of a great war, of an enemy who could tear holes between worlds. He left out the gods and the tailed beasts, framing it in terms they could comprehend. They listened, utterly captivated. It was a story more fantastic than any epic poem, yet coming from him, sitting right there, smelling of ozone and clean earth, it was undeniably real. As he finished, a shadow fell over their table. A woman stood there, her features obscured by the deep cowl of a simple, traveler's cloak. She seemed to have appeared from nowhere, her presence so unassuming that none of them, not even Naruto, had sensed her approach. A fascinating tale, she said, her voice a low, pleasant alto, utterly calm and devoid of inflection. One for the archives. The four of them were instantly on alert, their hands moving towards their weapons. Be at ease, adventurers, the woman said, holding up a placid hand. I am not a threat. Merely an observer. She looked directly at Naruto, and though he couldn't see her eyes, he felt her gaze, a deep and probing intelligence that was neither hostile nor friendly. It was purely analytical. The guild takes an interest in unique phenomena. A porcel, an rookie who completes a death trap quest in a single day, with the full confidence of a veteran silver party, is such a phenomenon. Who are you? High Elf Archer demanded, her voice sharp. You may call me the archivist. The woman replied smoothly. She reached into her cloak and placed a small, simple object on the table. It was a disc of polished black obsidian, completely featureless, that seemed to absorb the light around it. Your power, Naruto Uzumaki, is not of the sword, nor of the conventional schools of magic. It is something other. There may come a time when you face a problem that cannot be solved by destroying it. A political entanglement, a mystery wrapped in a lie, a curse that cannot be broken by force. She pushed the token towards him. When that day comes, present this token to any guild master in any kingdom. Tell them you wish to access the silent library. We will be listening. And with that, she turned and walked away, melting into the crowd and vanishing as mysteriously as she had appeared. The four of them stared at the black token sitting in the center of the table. The noisy, boisterous atmosphere of the guild hall seemed to fade into the background. A new, more complex, and far more dangerous layer of this world had just revealed itself to them. Naruto picked up the token. It was cool and smooth to the touch, and it felt heavy with secrets. He had wanted to start at the bottom, to live a simple life of helping people. But it seemed that in this world, just as in his own, power like his was a beacon that could not be hidden. It didn't just attract monsters from the darkness. It attracted the quiet, watchful eyes of those who moved in the shadows of thrones and institutions. His life as an adventurer had barely begun, and it was already infinitely more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. Of Princes and Plagues. The weeks that followed their return from the Barrow Hills settled into a new, exhilarating rhythm. The party, once a temporary alliance of convenience, had solidified into the guild's most talked about and efficient monster-slaying unit. They were a walking, breathing paradox, a silver-ranked team of non-human legends led, unofficially but undeniably, by a porcelain-ranked human rookie. They became known in the hushed, ale-fueled whispers of the guild hall as the Sunstone Party, a name born from the dwarf shaman's grudging description of Naruto's Rasengan as being as bright and dangerous as a star trapped in a rock. They didn't limit themselves to a single type of quest. One day they would be clearing out a nest of giant spiders in the Whispering Woods, with High Elf Archer's arrows and Naruto's clones making a mockery of the labyrinthine webs. The next, they would be courting a dwarven merchant caravan through orc-infested territory, a task that ended before it began when Naruto created a single, colossal shadow clone that stood 100 feet tall and simply stared down the orc war band until they fled in terror. They completed a half-dozen steel-rank quests and 3 silver-ranked contracts in a fortnight, a pace that was utterly unheard of. They never lost a client, never took a serious injury, and always got the job done with a speed and finality that bordered on the supernatural. Their fame grew, and with it, the dynamic within the group deepened into a powerful, unspoken bond. They would sit at their corner table, now informally reserved for them by the tavern staff, planning their next move. "There's a request for a wyvern hunt in the Dragon's Tooth Mountains," High Elf Archer said, tapping a well-drawn map. "The bounty is considerable. A good challenge for my bow." "HMPH. Wyverns," Dwarf Shaman grumbled, polishing a runed stone. "Nasty, leathery things. All screech and bad breath. I'd rather take the contract to clear the flooded lower levels of the old Moria Dun mine. Better chance of finding a forgotten vein of mithril than getting a decent stake off one of those overgrown lizards. The water in the mine may be stagnant," Lizard Priest added, his calm voice a counterpoint to the dwarf's grumbling. "A source of disease for the nearby villages. Tending to it would be a worthy endeavor." Naruto listened to them, a warm smile on his face. He wasn't just their leader, he was their friend. He had found a new team, a new family, in this strange, violent world. He looked up and caught the eye of Guild Girl, who was watching them from behind the counter. She gave him a small, radiant smile, a private acknowledgement that held a universe of warmth and admiration. Her initial, frantic concern for him had blossomed into a deep, professional respect, tinged with a personal affection she tried, and failed, to keep hidden behind her paperwork. She saw the good he was doing, the lives he was saving, and the way he treated his companions with unwavering fairness and respect. In a hall full of braggarts and glory seekers, he was a quiet, unshakable pillar of genuine heroism, and she found herself looking forward to the moments he would come to her counter, his foxy grin chasing away the weariness of her long days. It was into this comfortable routine that a new, discordant note sounded. It began not as a quest on the board, but as a rumor in the air. A whisper that traveled down from the high, cold peaks of the Frostfang Mountains. Carried by grim-faced merchants and frightened travelers. It spoke of a town called Silverpeak, a remote mining settlement prized for its unique, magically attuned silver ore. And it spoke of a plague. It wasn't a normal sickness. There was no fever, no cough, no rash. The miners of Silverpeak were simply falling asleep. One by one, they would lie down in their beds, or even slump over their workbenches, and descend into a slumber so profound that nothing could wake them. No healing potion, no priestly prayer, no shamanic ritual could stir them. Their bodies remained healthy, yet their minds were lost in some distant, unreachable country. The mine, the lifeblood of the town and a strategic resource for the kingdom, had fallen silent. Curiously, no official quest was ever posted. The local lord, a Baron von Hesse, a man known for his pride and political connections, had sealed the town. He claimed it was a simple, localized illness that was well under control, and he vehemently refused any aid from the Adventurers Guild, declaring it a matter for the barony's physicians. The Sunstone Party discussed it at their table. "A sleeping plague," Dwarf Shaman mused, his brow furrowed. "Sounds like a curse. Nasty business. To refuse the guild's help is the height of foolishness," High Elf Archer scoffed. "Pride is a luxury the dying cannot afford." Naruto listened, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. His sage mode could feel the distant echo of the story, a faint, discordant hum of suffering on the wind. People were in trouble, and politics was getting in the way. It was a tune he knew all too well. He was still pondering it when a royal knight, clad in the polished steel and golden lion crest of the palace guard, entered the guild hall. The man's eyes scanned the crowd, found Naruto, and made a beeline for their table. He bowed stiffly. "Sir Naruto Uzumaki," the knight said, his voice formal and loud enough to turn heads. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Annalise, requests your presence at the palace. At your earliest convenience." The familiar buzz of the guild hall died instantly. All eyes were on Naruto. First a letter from the king, now a personal summons from the princess. The rookie in the orange jumpsuit was becoming less of an anomaly and more of a legend. The princess did not receive him in the cavernous, intimidating throne room. Instead, he was escorted to her private solar, a chamber high in one of the palace's slender towers. It was a space that reflected its occupant perfectly. One wall was a massive, arched window that read a breathtaking panoramic view of the capital city. Another was covered floor to ceiling with bookshelves, crammed with tomes on history, strategy, and arcane lore. A large, intricate map of the key Nigdam was spread across a massive oak table, dotted with carved wooden markers representing armies, resources, and threats. It was not the room of a pampered royal, it was the war room of a keen, calculating mind. Princess Annalise stood before the window, her back to him, a vision in a gown of deep sapphire that contrasted with her fiery auburn hair. Standing near the door, as silent and immovable as a statue carved from steel and duty, was Captain Serafina. Her platinum hair was braided in its usual severe coronet, and her hand rested lightly on the pommel of her sword. Her cool, gray eyes watched Naruto's every move, but the open skepticism he had seen during their first meeting was gone, replaced by a complex, guarded respect. She had heard the stories. She knew what he was capable of. "Sir Naruto," Annalise said, turning from the window. A brilliant, intelligent smile touched her lips. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I trust your new career is proving fruitful." "It keeps me busy," Naruto said, his gaze taking in the room, the map, the subtle power dynamics at play. "So I have heard," she replied, her emerald eyes glinting. "The Sunstone Party, a rather poetic name. You have made quite an impression on the guild. And on my father." She gestured to the map on the table. "I did not summon you here for pleasantries. I summoned you because the kingdom has a problem. A problem I believe only you are equipped to solve." She walked to the table, her finger tracing a path into the mountains. "The town of Silverpeak," she said, her voice losing its light conversational tone and taking on a sharp, serious edge. "Its mine produces 90% of the kingdom's silversteel ore. It is a unique metal, highly conductive to enchantment. Our royal mages use it to forge the weapons and armor for the royal guard. It is the bedrock of our defense against the more formidable magical threats this world has to offer." She looked up, her gaze locking with his. "And production has ceased." She laid out the situation with the cold, precise clarity of a master strategist. She spoke of the sleeping plague, of Baron von Hesse's refusal of aid. But she added the layers of political intrigue that the rumors lacked. The Baron was a key ally of Minister Baratheon, the portly, arrogant man from the throne room. Baratheon's faction was a constant thorn in the king's side, always seeking to expand their own power. "Baron von Hesse is covering this up to save face," Annalise explained, "and Minister Baratheon is allowing it, because to admit a crisis in High Allies territory would be a political blow. My father cannot send the army or even the royal knights, as it would be seen as a direct move against a powerful noble house, potentially sparking a constitutional crisis. He is hamstrung. So you want to go around them," Naruto stated, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Annalise's smile returned, this time with a flash of genuine admiration. "Exactly. I cannot officially hire the guild. But I, as a private citizen of considerable means, can hire a certain party of adventurers for a personal contract." She slid a heavy purse across the map. "I want you and your team to go to Silverpeak. Find out what this plague truly is. And put an end to it. Quietly, unofficially. The fate of our kingdom's defense may very well rest on it." Captain Serafina shifted her weight. A minute sound of leather and steel. Her expression was stoic, but Naruto could feel the tension radiating from her. She did not approve of this clandestine approach, this circumvention of the proper channels. Yet, her loyalty to her princess was absolute. She was a woman caught between her rigid code of honor and the pragmatic necessities of power, and it was a conflict that Naruto, for some reason, found deeply compelling. He looked at the purse of gold, then back at the princess. He didn't care about the politics, the ministers, or the strategic importance of the ore. He had heard only one thing that mattered. "People are in trouble," he said, "and someone is stopping them from getting help." He pushed the purse back towards her. "Keep your money, princess. We'll take the job." Annalise blinked, genuinely surprised. "You would do this for free? This will be dangerous. You are placing yourself in opposition to a powerful nobleman." "It's the right thing to do," Naruto said with a shrug, as if it were the simplest, most obvious truth in the world. And to him, it was. That simple statement seemed to strike the princess more than any display of power he could have mustered. She looked at this strange man from another world, who had refused a barony, who fought for the common folk, who was now agreeing to undertake a politically suicidal mission not for gold or glory, but because it was right. In her world of intricate schemes and layered motivations, his straightforward, unshakable morality was as alien and as powerful as the sun. AFL. Ichor of something warm and deeply personal sparked in her intelligent green eyes. Very well, Sir Naruto, she said, her voice a little softer. Do what you must. Captain Serafino will provide you with a royal travel writ. It will not give you authority over the Baron, but it should at least prevent his men from killing you on sight. Naruto returned to the guild hall and laid out the mission to his team. He omitted the princess's name, framing it as a private contract from a concerned noble. High Elf Archer's lip curled in distaste. Politics. A filthy human game. Then she paused, her head tilted. But a sleeping curse. A sickness of the soul. That is an affront to the natural order. I will come. Dwarf shaman stroked his beard. The Baron is a fool, and his men are thugs. But the miners, they are brothers of the stone. To leave them to such a fate is unthinkable. My axe and my spells are yours. Lizard Priest simply nodded his great head. To bring slumber to the afflicted is a mercy of the gods. To force it upon the unwilling is the work of demons. We will bring them peace or absolution. Their decision was unanimous. Their loyalty was not to any noble or kingdom, but to their leader and the principles he stood for. Their journey to the Frostfang Mountains was grim. The verdant greens of the lowlands faded to the hardscrabble browns and grays of the high altitudes. The air grew thin and cold, and a perpetual, whining wind seemed to carry whispers of sorrow. The mountains loomed over them, jagged peaks of stone and ice that clawed at a slate-gray sky. The natural energy of the world here felt thin, stretched, and suppressed by a deep, unsettling cold. They arrived at the town of Silverpeak to find it just as the princess had described, eerily quiet. A crude, wooden palisade had been erected around the town, and guards in the Baron's livery, their faces grim and hostile, patrolled the perimeter. They were stopped at the gate, the captain of the guard a brutish man with a scar down his face. The town is under quarantine, he snarled. State your business and be gone. Naruto produced the royal writ. The captain's eyes widened slightly at the seal, his belligerence replaced by a sullen suspicion. The princess's seal. What business does a royal envoy have here? Official business, Naruto said, his voice level. Let us pass. The captain hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and the fear of defying a royal decree. He sent a runner, and after a long, tense wait, they were allowed entry, but with a stern warning, the Baron is not to be disturbed. Confine yourselves to the main inn. Any interference will be dealt with harshly. The town was a ghost town. Doors were shuttered, windows were dark. The only sound was the mournful howl of the wind through the narrow, cobbled streets. They found their way to a large, converted warehouse that was serving as an infirmary. The place was filled with cots, and on each cot lay a miner, still and silent. But this was not peaceful sleep. Their bodies were rigid, their faces locked in expressions of terror, their hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. Silent screams were etched on every face. Lizard Priest moved among them, his hand glowing with a soft divine light as he murmured prayers of cleansing. The light washed over the miners, but had no effect. The sleeping curse, or whatever it was, remained untouched. Dwarf shaman examined their bodies, finding no signs of poison, no physical ailment. High Elf Archer, her keen senses on high alert, paced the room. There is a scent here, she whispered. Faint, sickly sweet, like lotus blossoms left to rot in stagnant water. Naruto closed his eyes, shutting out the grim sight and the cloying smell. He extended his senses, not physically, but spiritually. Diving deep into the natural energy of the place, he felt for the signature of a magical curse, a viral pathogen, a poison in the air. He found nothing, but as he pushed his perception deeper, past the physical and into the metaphysical, he felt it. It was a subtle, rhythmic pulling, a gentle but relentless siphoning. He focused on one of the miners, on the faint, flickering flame of the man's life force. And he saw it, a thin, almost invisible thread of energy leading away from the man, away from the warehouse, away from the town itself, and into the dark, silent maw of the mountain's mine. Hundreds of such threads led from the sleeping townsfolk, a great, dark web of stolen life. And at the center of that web, deep in the frozen, silent earth, he felt a single, alien consciousness. It was ancient, patient, and utterly ravenous. It wasn't casting a spell. It wasn't spreading a disease. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his orange pupils blazing with a cold, dawning horror. "This isn't a plague," he said, his voice low and chilling, cutting through the silence of the infirmary. "It's a predator, and it's feeding on their dreams." Chapter 9 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.